Call to order. I'm Eric Greenberg, Chair of the CA Board of Directors. Please remember that this work session of the CA Board of Directors is being live streamed. You can find tonight's agenda and background materials on the CA Board's webpage. Links to those documents can also be found in the description section of our YouTube live stream for those that are watching the meeting there. If you are virtual, please mute your microphones unless speaking. If you're in the room, please ensure that your cell phones are silenced. Raise your hand to speak and I'll record the names in the order which I see them. If you're virtual, please raise your hand. As we move through the work session, I will introduce each item on the agenda. If at any point you have trouble hearing me or any other board member, please say so. Tonight's timekeeper is Alan Klein. I'll now call the roll. Dick.
Here.
Lynn. Is Lynn virtual?
She seemed to be on if she was.
Brian.
Yeah.
Josh.
Present.
Alan.
Here.
Dennis.
Here.
Keith.
Here.
Bill.
Here.
Andy.
Present.
Ginny.
Here.
And I am here. Can you get a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Alexa off.
Lynn, is that you?
I'll second it.
Yes.
Okay. I'll note that Lynn is present at the meeting virtually. We got a motion by Ginny, a second by Dick to approve the agenda. Any discussion on the agenda? Are there any objections to the agenda? Seeing no objections, the agenda is moved and passed by unanimous consent. Resident Speak Out. We will now move on to Resident Speak Out. I'll call on you one by one in the order which you signed up. Individuals have 3 minutes for comment. Anyone representing an organization has 5 minutes. Following remarks, the board will have a chance to ask questions. Please mute your microphones when you are not speaking. The first person is Dara Baker. Dara?
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
I hope everyone had a happy holiday. I'm anticipating that I'm going to be brief today. I've really got 3 questions for the board. Obviously, I'm speaking on Lake Elkhorn. My first big question is, has the board received answers to any of the questions that we have asked about Lake Elkhorn from our CA staff? If they have not, has the CA staff been able to provide the board with any reasonable answers for why they cannot actually provide answers to the questions about the project that they have agreed to and actually amended? And then my last sort of more intellectual question, which I hope that this board, and I'm presuming after elections, the next board that we educate on this all over again, is if we can't trust our staff in order to provide information within a reasonable window, and in this case, some of those questions have been open for 6 months, how on earth can we expect them to acknowledge and provide enough information for the board to decide whether or not the project being proposed by WSSI is a good one or not? And that's it for me.
Thank you. Do you have any questions? Alan?
Could you give me an example just of one question that you believe has been sitting out for whatever length of time that has not been answered?
Absolutely. This is going back, oh Lord, I'd have to go back and look at my notes. I am still looking to find out the answer to who at CA answered the questions from the MDE letter on the various sections specifically asking about CA's role. I think it was question 11, 13, 7H, and something else, and I'm making those up because I don't have them right in front of me. And then the other one, of course, is the question about the easement. And there's a whole slew of others that we've been asking and have not received answers. And as far as I know, you have not received answers either.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you for your testimony. Next, we have Sharon Boyes representing Protect Our Streams. Sharon?
Hello, good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening, board members. Thanks again for your dedication to our community, and thank you for this opportunity to speak out in opposition to the proposed Lake Elkhorn Mitigation Bank. The notion of mitigating permanent destruction of our critical wetlands, forests, and streams by destroying another area and then selling credits for this activity for enormous profits is just plain absurd on its face. But this is precisely what we've been sold in this flawed bill of goods. Not only will 133 acres of our open space and 6 miles of stream be destroyed, but the same amount will be destroyed elsewhere because of us. CA and WSSI haven't said how much they stand to gain, but the credits are worth so much money that Maryland has a gouging rule in place. But here's what isn't adding up. If CA does not know the plans, as Dennis has stated, How can you possibly believe that CA will be getting $10 million worth of free work? What document says that? Which statement is false? Let's say it costs WSSI $5 million to remove 65 acres of mature forest to get to the stream banks. Is CA or Columbia receiving a $5 million benefit, or is it an incalculable loss? Was CA looking to bulldoze 65 acres of mature forest for free? Can anyone tell me tonight, how much does WSSI guarantee this will save us on dredging costs? Is it in writing? What if Lake Elkhorn has to be dredged 2 years after the project begins like Wild Lake? Will WSSI pay for the dredging? I saw the new flow chart and I appreciate the time and effort that went into it, but for some reason, we just can't seem to make you guys hear that. Please, look at me. Once the prospectus has been approved, you will lose your authority and oversight. CA cannot tell the U.S. Army Corps or the EPA what to do. Please stop kidding yourselves. This is what happened in Longfellow. Changes to the approved plan would require a new permit, and that's not happening. You may only have 10 days after the new plans have been submitted to withdraw. It doesn't matter what Dennis says on the flow chart. What does the contract say? What do the easements say? And by the way, how much open space is currently in an easement? How much have corporations profited from CA open space and easements? Has CA already given away millions of dollars worth of easements at the expense of the community? Is the IRS aware that the open space is valued at $0? Could these actions jeopardize CA's tax exempt status? How is the community financially benefited from any disposition of those easements? CA had to budget $50K to mitigate negative impacts in the Longfellow easement, and the stream corridor is still a disaster. Do other easements cost us money while corporations profit? Protecting our streams and ponds is not a political matter, but it is up to each and every one of us to stand up and speak out for what matters to all of us, to preserve and protect what others preserve for us, and what makes our community the special place it is. Since this board is now leftist to carry over for the next board, I'm personally asking anyone listening tonight to please be very, very clear on where your candidates stand on preserving and protecting our forests and streams in the open space before you vote for them. Finally, there's been a lot of red flag warnings and concerns after the wildfire in Baltimore County. Wildfires here in Maryland. I want to share a story with you. It was a hot, dry summer of 2021. They just completed the stream project in Longfellow, and what had been a lush, green, wet, mature forest with ferns and skunk cabbage and wetland plants was now a baking hot, dry savanna with hard, compacted, cracked clay and a 3-foot-tall sea of dead, dried-out, invasive stilt and basket grass dotted with dead branches and dead trees. I had noticed the area was becoming a magnet for folks partying in their cars. I'll never forget the look on the face of the Army Corps rep when I said I had never been concerned about a wildfire in Columbia before, but now all it would take was one lit cigarette butt and a strong wind. What CA is doing is detrimental to our community, and we are no longer tolerating CA's abuses. This is negligence and a breach of your fiduciary duty. You need to take this into serious consideration tonight, right here and now. Longfellow is owed. Even the Army Corps has questioned CA's outreach on Elkhorn. Will Longreach, Jeffers Hill, and Owen Brown be owed too? It's way past time, but I'm still asking for you to please stand up for our community and protect our forests and ponds and streams and quality of life. Thank you for your immediate consideration and action on this tonight, and I hope everyone will please remember to vote. Thank you so much, and thanks again to all of our dedicated volunteer neighbors. It's been a tough year, but we really, really appreciate all that you've done for our community. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Thank you for your testimony. Next, we have Douglas Jarrett representing Howard County Moms Demand Action.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name's Doug Jarrett. I've been a resident of Columbia since 1994. I've been involved with Moms Demand Action since February as I retired. Moms Demand Action is a nationwide organization with a very active state and Howard County chapter. And there are two goals, the purposes of the organization really can be summarized as awareness about gun violence and efforts to stop and control and limit gun violence. And the other is to persuade, cajole, influence our elected officials to adopt laws, common sense gun laws. There was recently a bill was adopted this past, one of the last ones was SB 1, which limits the areas in which concealed carry or any type of firearm can be carried into public places. It's a very interesting attempt to get around the adverse Supreme Court decision. Why I'm here this evening is to ask the association, the board, to adopt a proclamation declaring the first Friday in June to be the National Gun Violence Awareness Day. This really stems from a 2013 killing of a young woman in Chicago. She was 15 years old. And her friends decided to celebrate her birthday as a gun awareness day, in which everyone is asked to wear, at public forums and areas, to wear orange, as orange is the color that hunters wear when they go hunting, to protect each other and to see each other so they don't shoot each other. So the proclamation really simply endorses requests, and we've distributed a copy, I believe, to everybody, and I have two to circulate if you'd like, that the association adopt the proclamation, preferably at its April meeting, and that take the additional step that's been taken in the past of illuminating Lake Kittamaconda. I got it right. I'm sorry if I mispronounced it. To illuminate that in orange. That's the essence of the request. There'll be meetings and other things going on that day as well. Yes.
Thank you. Jenny.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Could you get us a copy of what you want us to pass?
Yes, I thought we submitted one, and
I didn't get it.
no, I have two here. Let me bring it up.
Okay, and then we can get it copied and distributed. Or,
And if you want to edit it, please feel free and just
well,
get back to me.
you don't want to take a chance on that. The other question is, were you saying that you wanted the fountain down at the lakefront
Illuminated in orange.
in orange? We did that, I remember, 2 years ago or 3 years ago, as part of this
Right.
resolution we passed a couple of years ago. Yes, I don't know. I think if we can, that would be a great idea.
Yes.
Alan?
Yeah, I was going to say, we've done this before. Is there anything different about this
No.
proclamation in the past? And is this the kind of
The same
thing
thing.
that we need to do every year, or can we just make it so, as they say?
I think the association, the organization would much prefer that if you somehow annualize it, take the steps to create a local holiday or a local recognition on that, I think it's the first Saturday of June every year. That would be great.
Annualize it, meaning set it and forget, and not forget it.
Yeah,
Set it and go,
exactly.
Rather than having to redo it.
Sure,
Thank you.
sure.
Any further questions? Jenny?
I'm sorry, is it the first Friday in June or the first Saturday?
I believe it's the first Saturday.
This says first Friday.
Okay. then
One Friday? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any further questions? Bill?
Thank you for your speak out testimony tonight. I just had more of a general question to the board. Do we have a policy on firearms on CA property or anything like that?
We do,
Okay,
except for duly authorized law enforcement officers.
understood. Thanks.
So even if you have concealed carry, you can't carry on a CA-owned facility?
Their policy.
Okay, understood.
Yeah. I mean, that was a very it's a very interesting thing what
We have the right to ban
the
people from
Maryland
Maryland.
legislature adopted to control where guns can be taken. The Supreme Court said to New York, you can't qualify people, pre-qualify people on who can carry guns as a general rule. There are a lot of exceptions, and Maryland's a pretty good state. It has an assault ban, a ban on assault gun weapons, which is great. And what's going on, unfortunately, in Tennessee and Louisville, it's a shame. But thank you for your time.
Thank you. Dennis, is there any issues with putting this on the April agenda for a vote?
No.
Okay, so we'll add this to the April agenda for a vote. Thank you. Next, we have Amy Bennett. Amy, are you out there? Okay. Next, we have Sky Anderson. Oh, wait.
Good evening. Oh,
I'll let Sky go first, then I'll go back to Amy. So Sky,
okay. Good evening. I'm Sky Anderson from Clares Forest. My planned remarks tonight have been superseded, so I'm going to address the topic of ethics. Number one, if I read the proposed ethics policy correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, changes to the current enforcement indicate that if a complaint is lodged against the chair, its validity will be determined by the vice chair, not the audit committee. Then why do we have an audit committee? At the very least, validity should be determined by the rest of the board, without the chair, of course, and even the vice chair, because they work so closely together. Complaints against the chair must be objectively investigated, as they should for any other board member. Please approve the Miles Stockbridge recommendations. They are the subject matter experts. You're paying them for their expertise and experience, and we do not want our money wasted. Number two, it appears there's a change to be considered so that a unanimous vote of the board, not merely a majority vote, is required for action to be taken. I could be wrong, it's a little bit unclear. The terms used were considered by the full board. Ethics complaints are serious, not to be lightly brought up. Once investigated and after determination is reached, if a unanimous decision is required, then even apparent breaches may become rampant. Not okay. Number three, please read the ethics policy carefully and share it with your colleagues and constituents so that you make the right decision. 4, and maybe, just maybe it would be better to wait until the new board is seated. They are the ones who will have to abide by the ethics policy. Number 5, the ethics policy must be reviewed by council and appropriate staff members. To do any less would open us up to having a poor policy or worse. And finally, in agenda topic 4D1, page 2 and 3, the word recuse may be used incorrectly. A board does not vote to recuse a member. Only a member can recuse himself, or not. It's his choice. That's my understanding based on the workings of the zoning board in my village. Thank you.
I've got a couple of comments. A couple of things I do want to state. So when you read that, so a complaint would come in, and someone's got to handle it. Someone's got to receive it. So a complaint against the chair would be received by the vice chair. But the key phrase on both paragraphs was whether it comes to the chair or the vice chair is it needs to be considered by the full board of directors. So the complaint would have to be heard and considered. And by considered, you go into the paragraph under section 2, would basically say it requires a vote in accordance with our bylaws. So basically what would happen is if a complaint came in and it's received by the chair or vice chair, that would go to the full board for a vote in accordance with CA bylaws. So does that make sense?
It does. If I misinterpreted it, then other people may do the same, because I spent quite a bit of time trying to figure this out.
So basically, there's not too many, this is all based on the current policy. So the main changes are to make it, I hope, clearer that one person, the chair or vice chair, can't just unilaterally dismiss something.
And maybe I just disagree with it. So,
Okay.
I have a
Tom?
procedural question. I thought our purpose was to ask questions of, on the one hand, I appreciate you having that interaction, giving Sky the information. On the other hand, if that becomes precedent for how we interact with everybody who asks us something, we could be in real trouble with residents speak out.
Yeah, I agree, but if there's something that I think is factually incorrect, I think it's important to correct that.
Policy.
Vic?
Sky, are you familiar with the duties of the audit committee?
I'm sorry?
Are you familiar with the duties of the audit committee?
Not really.
You might want to talk to Jackie. They do a lot more
Oh, right, right.
than just the ethics
And this was
complaints.
just one facet that I was talking about.
Well, you said that,
I'm sure if there's a full-time director.
well, she's sitting
they
right
do a lot more
behind
than
you.
that.
Yeah, I'm sure she'd fill you in on all the work she does.
Bill?
I just want to go on record that I agree with Alan and his comment regarding resident speak up.
Okay. Any further questions? Thank you. Amy Bennett, are you out there?
I am.
Cool, thanks.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Amy Bennett. I live in the village of Longreach. Most of the time I'm here to talk about the Lake Elkhorn project, but tonight I'm here to talk for a few minutes about rain gardens. Any comprehensive storm management program must employ this essential and effective tool for help managing stormwater runoff. Last November, I began investigating CA's grant program for installation of a rain garden, and after completing my paperwork, my garden will be installed next week. I was so excited about my rain garden, I wanted to share it with my neighbors, but recently found out that CA was not competitive in the last 2 grant cycles, so the program will end in June. I decided to post an announcement on Nextdoor to let people know that they had 2 months to apply for the program. Just 4 sentences describe the initiative. I am not a social media person, so I was shocked to get a note from Nextdoor 48 hours later saying my post had generated tremendous interest to the tune of 1,700 views. An hour later, 1,800 views. Our community is obviously very interested in the Rain Garden Initiative. How we communicate with people about these opportunities should be the focus of future discussions. I believe the Columbia Association has a role, but I also believe that each board member has a responsibility to its village. In communicating with John McCoy about the positive response, he indicated that Howard County has a similar program. I encourage every board member to become familiar with the Howard County Initiative and communicate it within your villages. I will certainly be doing so in my village. I believe that we have only installed, I believe it's under 20 rain gardens this year. I could be way wrong, but I'm telling you that 1,800 people read my 4-sentence descriptor. Thank you. And obviously, I'm very supportive of the Rain Garden Initiative and will do anything I can to help with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Ginny? I think Ginny's got a question.
Yeah. Amy, one of my concerns about rain gardens, because there are lots of positives, I totally agree with you, but there is no requirement to maintain a rain garden. So you spend X number of dollars to serve a certain purpose, and then if it's eventually not maintained, it's not serving that purpose. And that seems to be one of the problems. And there are many reasons why it's not maintained. We won't go into them, but I don't know how you deal with that issue. And I'm not asking you to answer it. I'm more saying this to Dennis and the staff and the county.
I'd like to respond, actually. When I met with John, he explained what my responsibilities were. And as a homeowner and somebody who's putting money into it, This is not all free. I'm committed to maintaining. Now, I think that's a problem that we could deal with. I would hope Dennis would agree.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you. Next, we have Deborah Wessner representing the Columbia Association Watershed Advisory Committee.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I am a 44-year resident of Columbia and have watched it grow with respect for the ideals that were part of its inception. Tonight, I speak on behalf of the Columbia Association Watershed Advisory Committee, referred to as the CAWAC. The CAWAC, composed of resident members from each village, has a variety of educational, professional, and volunteer backgrounds, including master naturalists, master gardeners, environmental scientists, environmental educators, weed warriors, master watershed stewards, civil engineers, and village environmental activists. Most CAWAC members have lived in Columbia for over 10 years and can be found actively volunteering on watershed-related projects on a weekly basis. Over a year ago, the CAWAC provided the board with our recommendation to support the Lake Elkhorn Stream Restoration Project. We continue to support the project. Our reasons include the following. 1, continued erosion of the storm streams is dumping untreated silt, nitrogen, and phosphorus into the lake. These components are causing the lake to have a buildup of not only chemicals, but of algae which cover the surface for part of the year. The algae is not only unattractive, but can be dangerous. Filamentous algae grow near the pond edge and gradually float to the surface. It is unsightly and may interfere with fishing or other recreational activities, as well as lead to early morning fish kills caused by low dissolved oxygen. Blue-green algae can grow in lakes, ponds, and slow-moving streams when environmental conditions are right, including warm water, abundance of nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen, and plenty of sunlight. Blue-green algae produce cytotoxins, as well as taste and odor compounds that foul the water they are found in. The cyanotoxins can pose a serious threat to not only fish, but to companion animals and to humans as well. Last summer, CA asked the Maryland Department of the Environment to test for those toxins after blue-green algae were detected in Lake Elkhorn, Wild Lake, and Kittamukundy. Further, the excessive buildup of silt requires the continued need and perhaps increased frequency of dredging. The Columbia Association has spent $7.5 million dredging Lake Elkhorn, with approximately 72,000 cubic yards of sediment removed in the past 10 years. 2, due to climate change, we are experiencing shorter duration and more intense storms, causing stronger surges of stormwater into and through our streams. The intensity of that stormwater is causing scouring of the sidewalls and deepening of the channels. The erosion is causing trees to fall and across the streams, sometimes creating sediment buildups that stop the water flow. Erosion is also reducing the margins adjacent to homeowner properties, and in some places is reducing the protective barrier of soil around sewer and water pipes, exposing them to damage. The CA board tasked the staff with finding ways to decrease the cost for dredging and rehabilitation of streams, lakes, and ponds. The staff determined ways to do this with cooperative projects that allowed the county, the state, and now private enterprises to undertake the work, as well as the cost and maintenance of the projects. In exchange, the party will receive TMDL credits, which can be used in Maryland and federal clean water requirements. The CAWAC reminds the board that despite the claims of some residents, there is not a design for the project to be accomplished. The design will depend on whether or not banking credits are approved and how much is approved. It is unlikely there will be a ruling on credits for another 6 months. The contract with WSSI does contain protections for the association, the residents, and the environment. Further, CA and its contractors must abide by county, state, and federal regulations with regard to forest and wetland preservation. There is no current or future plan in HOCO by design to re-engineer or implement new stormwater capture and treatment of Longreach, Owen Brown, and Oakland Mills existing neighborhoods that contribute to the flow to Lake Elkhorn. Yes, CAWAC members and the staff continue to encourage residents in those neighborhoods to slow the flow with individual mitigation devices like rain gardens. But the implementation is minimal at best. In a recent presentation to the CAWAC, including our board member liaison, it was learned that it would require over 50,000 rain gardens to do that job. There are not that many homes in the footprint we're speaking about. The Columbia Association has been vilified by some residents who are opposed to this project. I know these staff members, they're not out to kill Bambi or Mr. Owl, nor are they trying to reduce the forested areas to become sunny acres.
Thank you.
So board members, think about the good that this project will do to retain a clean Lake Elkhorn for Columbia residents to enjoy, to minimize erosion, damage to residential properties, and to continue to have a walkable nature preserve along the Columbia Association pathways.
Thank you. Do we have any
Thank
questions? Alan?
Yeah, thank you, Deborah. You said that the contract contains protections. Could you describe 2 or 3 of them?
I can't describe them in specific. I would appreciate it if Dennis would address that, if anyone. We have looked at some of the things, and it includes tagging trees to make sure that we don't take down trees that are important trees to the environment and the area. It does include areas that talk about not going onto residential properties and assuring that residents are aware of what is going to be happening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Deborah, thanks for coming in. I'd like to correct one particular thing you said, the number of rain gardens. That was Jim Caldwell, when he came to Howard County, he spoke to the WAC committee. He said we'd need 10,000 rain gardens in the whole of Howard County. So that's a whole lot different.
Yes, that was a long time ago, Brian.
Right, but I'm just telling you that's what was said.
I understand that, but this was from the Department of Natural Resources.
Bill?
That we got this number.
Deborah, Bill Santos, Wild Lake, just in response to Brian's question, the presentation that you have seen recently, did that take into account the greater frequency and duration and intensity of rainfall? Could that explain the difference in the number of rain gardens?
It did take that into account. It took into account the 1 inch, 2.6 inches overall during a major rainstorm. So yes, it did take into account the larger rainstorms.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you. Next we have Sue Bannister.
Hello?
Hello.
Am I up?
You're up.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Oh, am I on?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
I can't see myself. Can you restart the clock, please?
Yeah, we can see you and we can hear you.
Okay, can you restart that? Thank you.
Let's restart.
Good evening, everyone. I think by now you all know that both of the agencies, Maryland Department of Environment and the Army Corps, have strongly recommended the removal of Reach 1, where the project Lake Elkhorn I'm talking about, which I oppose, is to begin, as well as identifying many other serious problems. I want to highlight just one of those problems in my 3 minutes tonight that you may not have heard about yet if you don't live in Long Reach. Reach 1 in Long Reach is the area from High Tor Hill to Jackson Pond. The concept map of Reach 1 marks the areas of disturbance and easements. If you look at the map, one of their maps on Reach 1, you can note the locations of the construction entrances, which are marked on the maps with little yellow circles around the letter CE, where the heavy machinery and equipment and vehicles move back and forth as the construction takes place. The location of the construction entrance for the very first stretch of Reach 1 is right next to Phelps Luck Elementary School. This is a high-traffic, busy neighborhood where the elementary school, built in 1972, is undersized and over capacity, with portable classrooms out back on a grassy play area, children walking on all the paths surrounding the school, and Old Stone Court, a short, narrow road, serves as the single point of entry and exit for all school buses and vehicles. This construction entrance is where all the heavy construction machinery, vehicles, and equipment will be moving every day. to paraphrase something I heard last week or last time, this is a community nightmare. The question is, why would they place a construction entrance next to a school and at a location with such heavy traffic? Only the Columbia Association has the responsibility and authority to act on behalf of the safety and welfare of the people in our community. The safety and social welfare of today's long-reach children cannot be sacrificed for this project. We're not going away. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any questions? Thank you. Next, we have Joel Hurwitz.
Good evening, Joel Hurwitz. I live in Harper's Choice. Currently have an active bar license in Pennsylvania and attended Syracuse Law School, as did our president. A couple months ago, I sent you all an email regarding the interpretation of the charter provisions or the Articles of Incorporation in the villages that would seem to say that the council should be nominating the members before you appoint them, and you should have more than your pro forma meeting of picking a chair and the vice chair and approving the agenda from the previous year of pick the chair and the vice chair. So I'm pointing that out again for your organization meeting. Regarding the comments from Miles and Stockbridge, on number 3, it's a little inaccurate. It says that there's no conflict to become or remain a Columbia Council representative. Yes, there's no conflict to become because you're not a member of the board. So I don't even understand why it's there. Only remain is an issue. Number 4, regarding the Inner Arbor, it says that the board member must disclose the conflict and should voluntarily recuse. The Inner Arbor conflict is one of public record. There's no recusal necessary. They then talk about how these things are consistent with past advice, which I strongly disagree with. The charter in 7.4 says that the president of the corporation shall be a director and an ex officio member, but not vote. Paragraph 5, right under it says a majority of the directors entitled to vote should constitute a quorum. That's referencing 5 back to 4. The last sentence of that paragraph says that the director entitled to vote shall be entitled to cast 1 vote every matter presented to the board of directors. Again, it's carving out the president who's the director, not this thing that you can start coming up with policies to decide that you can't vote in certain situations. They state that it's an interplay between the state law, but it was the state law of Section 2419 that I've been talking about trying to get your attention to for nearly a decade until you only got it a few months ago, but the attorney didn't actually give you the text and misinterpreted it. Recusal and recuse do not appear in the law. In fact, the law states that allowing the presence of the interested director and being allowed to vote shows that it's the opposite of recusal. They say the government's entitled to complement each other, but they then have these conflicts. 5.4 basically has what is in 2419 of the Corporations Association article, except for the part about, trying to remember, being, anyway, it's a little outdated, but it's generally there. Sorry, I lost my thought there. Say that you can have an ethics policy to choose the right to vote.
That's time. Do you have any questions? Ellen.
So, regarding your first point, let's assume that your reading is accurate. What's the impact besides sort of, in my words, pro forma doing it the way it says in the, would it give any benefit to do it the way you're talking about, or would it just be more according to the document?
It would certainly give the council some more purpose in its current structure from the one from a decade and a half ago when the CA used to meet as the council once a month and then as the board the other times a month.
That purpose being to nominate the 10 people themselves as CA board member. or
Yes,
service.
because you're having a pro forma meeting for an organization that doesn't have any rules, so there's not even a requirement that you have your annual meeting. But if you read the Articles of Incorporation, the villages, it says that the council, in turn being entitled to nominate from among its membership, implies that you should be doing something more than this pro forma. Because the election over the chair and the vice chair for a board that it never meets is it's kind of silly.
I'll give you that. Thank you.
And any further questions? Thank you. That concludes resident speak out for tonight's work session. To limit interruptions during the board discussion, all members of the general public will now be returned to the audience. This means you'll no longer be able to show your camera or unmute your audio, but you're more than welcome to stay on as an attendee and watch the remainder of the work session. You can also watch a live stream on the CA Livestream YouTube page. Thank you so much for your participation tonight. I will now take a moment to allow staff to make this transition. Do we want to break and come back in 5 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll recess. We'll return at 7:45. It's becoming tradition now. Okay, we'll reconvene at 7:45.
Cool.
All right.
I'd like to reconvene the meeting. Our first work session topic tonight is the proposed FY23 funding, the emergency cash reserves.
So, just to give a little bit of background, so the CA board, approved funding or creating an emergency cash reserves policy. It was the first time in CA's history, and it as part of the FY22 budget process, the board approved an initial funding of $2 million. So in FY22, later in the fiscal year, the board also approved funding additional reserves, and it actually was $3.133 million, bringing the total to $5,133,000 as of the end of last fiscal year. So for the, I included in the packet with the memo was some background material and the actual policy, but the reserve was developed based on a risk-based approach. So we considered sustainability. We did a good bit of research for reserve fund guidance for other nonprofits, and we translated the risks into activity-based reserve targets. So, and then that tool, again, we identify the risks, we estimate the probability and the impact, and then use that data to determine the initial reserve targets. Then the policy requires that we review it every year. So we did that last year, and now we're doing that again this year. So the assumptions, lots of fine print here, are that there'll be 60 days of cash on hand. We updated that each year. So this year used the FY24 board-approved budget. There's some annual charge revenue risk based on property valuations. We reduced the impact of that last year and kept it the same for this review. We have an existing line of credit, which is obviously important to CA's working capital needs. We have not used that this year, but that is expiring in June. We expect that to be renewed. We're working on that actually as we speak. So the next expiration would be June 2026, so FY27. And then there's also exposure for uninsurable legal expenses based on as CA's deductibles for insurance and the benchmarked coverage for certain exposures. So last year increased the likelihood percentage and shortened the time horizon, but I did not make any changes to that this year. And then finally, the full funding of the targeted reserves we projected for April of 2028. I extended that last year because of the increase in the total and other cash needs. This year, I did not extend it. I just kept it at April of 2028. So the chart, all of this detail, this is also in the memo, so I won't review it, but this puts the dollars and the percentage of impact and likelihood to the matters that I just reviewed with you. So we're proposing that that the board would approve an additional $3 million in funding for the emergency cash reserves this year. They're in a favorable cash position because of some grant funding that CA received that was not expected when the budgets were done, and also better continued strong expense control and better than expected revenue. So,
Susan, when do you want questions?
You're welcome to ask questions as yes.
Alan.
If you could go back to that chart.
Uh-huh.
Curious, looking at the operations and the legal roads.
Uh-huh.
So the operations doesn't have a percentage on it. Okay, I think I've answered my question because I was conflating the percentages. I would like to go back to one of the assumptions, and just so I'm understanding, I'm not debating the assumption, but the one that talked about the annual charge revenue risk, maximum 10% decrease, and that the likelihood is 40%. So when I think of something like that, I assume that it's not going to go from 0 to 10%. It could be anywhere along that range or more. But if the likelihood is at 40%, which is almost half, 1 in 2 chance, flip of a coin, that it's going to reach that 10%. It seems to me to suggest that there's a very high likelihood that there's going to be a larger shortfall, pretty large shortfall or decrease. And are we? So just help me connect the numbers. If the likelihood is 40%, how much are we targeting, and how is that calculated?
So it's an estimated potential 10% decrease in valuations in total. That in worst case, 10% decrease. But I don't think that is going to be the full 10% decrease. I think there's a 50% impact on that. The likelihood's about 40%. So it's just reducing it. It's just trying to gauge how likely something is that would happen and what the impact would be.
I get that. So now if you could take those numbers that we just talked about and go back to the chart and tell me what number accounted for that.
So it's the,
looks like it's
just
looks like a fairly small
the
number.
whole amount would be $1 million. And so we're just saying that for the first year, just half of that would be what we would be targeting to fund.
Okay. To account for potentially getting halfway there. But
Right.
Okay,
Just trying to.
Thank you. I just want to crosswalk the numbers, make sure I was understanding.
Yeah, the question I have is, what does impact percentage mean? So the way I understood risk is likelihood times the impact or the consequence. And so likelihood's a probability, consequences obviously here, things like dollars. But what does impact percentage mean? What does that mean from a pragmatic standpoint? How is that calculated?
So the severity of the impact on the organization, it's just an estimate of how severe or this would be on a scale of, not very or not at all to 100% severe.
But isn't severity captured in the dollar amount on the first column?
No, I don't think it is. That would be. The impact is a value to how difficult it would be for the organization to overcome or not overcome that, but the dollars are just what the total exposure is. So,
because I imagine something that has an event that had a big dollar amount would be much harder to overcome than something that has a small dollar amount.
It would be if we thought we would get to the maximum.
Okay, so this is the maximum, and then the impact tries to represent the typical?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Dick?
I like the formula. It's a very clever way to figure out the improbable, but I'm wondering how you arrived at some of the likelihood numbers. Annual charge revenue declining 40%. I would think that the odds would be that, if anything, the property values would increase. Is that 40% seem a little high?
Well, first of all, it's being only applied to a 10% decrease. So it's only being, and I don't, your guess is as good as mine, probably, except that we have seen issues with commercial properties. So not from a residential standpoint, most likely, but I think there is
so you do have some indicators there that would support that. And what would you consider to be uninsurable legal expenses? Was that
those would be deductibles on policies that where
somebody fell down the stairs or something, and we'd have a deductible.
Well, we have an employment practice liability claim that exceeds it, and we have a $200,000 deductible on that policy.
Oh, okay.
If we have more than one of those,
okay.
Or there's some willful act that needs indemnification but isn't insurable, something like that.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Bill?
Getting back to the declining property values, I should get closer
Very
to the
small
mics.
dollar amount in the
Right.
scheme of things.
Just, you're talking about the commercial properties. This ties back to the abatement fund that we have, which fairly closely matches what we're calculating our risk here with, and
Well, for the first year.
yeah. So I just want to,
Yeah, good point.
it closed the circle. That's what I'm trying to do with it, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So actually, I do have a question on that. So we have an abatement fund. Is that separate from the emergency cash reserves?
Not a fund, it's not cash. It's a write down of the revenue. So this is cash.
Okay.
Right.
And then I guess trying to, I'll use the annual charge revenue as an example. And I just want to know if I'm understanding this right. So time horizon's FY25. So if I read this, is this line basically saying there's a 45% chance from now to the end of FY25 that there will be there'll be a event that causes property values to decline that would cost us potentially $2.5 million.
Right.
Okay, thanks. Bill.
And just the last thing, given how I mean, it's going to be hard to predict the future financially, economically, what's going on here. But given where we are, I had a question. Is $3 million this year enough? Are we confident?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, no, not technically, because the full targeted amount is 18 million, and we're only looking at trying to have 60 days of cash on hand, for example. It's not a very high target. But I think it's a reasonable investment this year, funding, and I don't believe we were expecting to be able to fund it at all this year. So I think this is a move forward.
Thank you.
Alan?
What's been the consequences of CA not having such emergency cash reserves for the past 50 years?
So you might remember the early when the mandated shutdown of our facilities in March of 2020, when we did not bill for for the memberships and so on. We did not have, and we were substantially and appropriately so, was borrowing on our line of credit, but we had a difficult. It was a credit crisis at the same time of a pandemic, and we could have used the cash.
Thank you.
Is that the only time that CA has suffered a consequence of not having?
I can't speak to before my time, but I know there were financial challenges before I came that I'm sure would have been, and it would have been helpful to have some cash rather than have to borrow at very high interest rates.
Dennis?
At one point in time, CA moved out of the offices that they had in Century Plaza into the Public Works Garage. So I'm pretty sure there were some financial...
A bus depot, right?
Yes, exactly.
So I was there.
So there have been other times.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any further questions? I'll let you continue.
That's it.
Oh, that's it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are we going to discuss the policy piece of this?
Yes. So, so we had the recommendation of adding $3 million to the cash reserve. So this was in the budget, but we'll need to vote on that separately.
This was not in the 23 budget.
Oh, it's not in the 23 budget.
This was FY23, so we did not budget it for FY23.
Okay. So this needs to be, so this will go on top of the budget that we just approved.
No, this is for the current fiscal year that you're sitting in. You approved the budget for next fiscal year.
Oh, so, okay. So you're proposing to add, so this is proposed to add $3 million to this fiscal year, and we've already added to next fiscal year, $3 million.
It's budgeted for next year. There was no increase or funding budgeted for FY23. This is cash funding. We're recommending cash to be set aside in FY23, this fiscal year.
Okay, for this fiscal year. Okay. Ellen?
And assuming we didn't have that $3 million in Silicon Valley Bank, we do have $3 million sitting around somewhere?
We do, and you should know that by looking at the quarterly financials that we just produced.
I'm not always sure whether it's cash or whether it's... what it is, so that's.
Crypto.
Bill?
That just, we talked about this late in a meeting one night, but I believe the third quarter report puts us like 8 million over. We're in the black, 8 million. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, everybody, but I believe that's the number. But 3 million makes sense because that's available, right?
8 million balance.
I'm sorry, yeah.
Any further questions? Any questions on policy? Dick?
Yes, I'm glad we have this reserve fund, and I want to make sure that it's not something that is easily tapped into.
Right.
And it needs to be a real serious emergency, not just get through a weekend or something. And as I read this, I'm looking for where it is. It looks like the president and CEO can take, 20,000 or something, some amount out without telling the board. I don't think any move should be made to tap into this fund unless the board's fully aware of what's been happening. And we're talking 60 days worth of cash. I think we could, within a week, we could agree to approve tapping into the fund.
Right. Keith?
I just wanted to register. I wholeheartedly disagree. I'm comfortable with the idea of reporting in the sense that if the cash reserve is utilized in that fashion, that it gets reported to the board, but not to get the board involved in managing that cash flow in that quantity. So I just want to be careful that we don't go down that path of strapping essentially the operations of the organization.
And may I clarify also that any drawdown that will not, or cannot be replaced within the same fiscal year must be approved in advance by the board.
Bill?
I respect both Dick and Keith's positions, but I'd like to draw possibly a compromise in that I believe this policy is aimed at, given that we're a homeowners association, notice must be given in order to conduct a meeting. $20,000 seems in a corporation this size a suitable amount to be able to take something, or the president will be able to take action for any perceived emergency until such a meeting can be properly noticed and convened. And I think it's a very important stopgap measure. I agree with you that notice and approval is important from the board, but I think that there should be some leeway to take immediate action if that is so necessary.
I do have one question for Dick. I don't see the $20,000. I don't see it anywhere in here. Could you point me to it in the policy?
Okay, that's in section 5, authority to use the emergency cash reserve.
20,000 in there. It says
Okay.
authority to access and use, so long as that use is consistent.
And I don't
know where I got that.
I got at the end of this memo. There's the Columbia Association Emergency Cash Reserve Policy. I don't see it 20,000 anywhere.
I'm sorry, I don't know where I got that number. I remembered it from when I read this several days ago.
Actually, it doesn't say how much. It says that any amount withdrawn.
Now, you don't know whether you're going to be able to get back in step within the end of the fiscal year. I mean, there's some real uncertainty here. And so how do you know whether the amount withdrawn will be subsequently replenished? I just want to make sure that this doesn't look like some kind of a slush fund. And I think Bill has a good point. Maybe it's just a matter of notifying the board immediately that this is taking place and we should have a meeting. But if it's a crisis,
I mean,
we could go with this.
I mean, Section 4 also has a reporting and monitoring requirement. Oh, Section 6. I got my eyes and ears confused. Section 6 has a reporting and monitoring requirement.
And I'm sorry.
Susan?
The balance of the fund is reported quarterly on the financials.
Alan, do you have a question?
Well, I guess, I remember us having discussion about that and that thing about the cannot or will not or cannot be replaced. And I guess what I'd like to hear is an example a reasonable example of that kind of situation? Because I'm sort of agreeing with Dick in the sense that I don't know how we know. If there's an emergency, how would we know that it's going to be able to be replaced by the end of the fiscal year? I mean, unless it was the day before the end of the fiscal year, then we know for sure. I'm not clear what that's covering, I guess. Or,
Well, yeah, that's right. That's a great, an uninsurable loss, like Lynn just pointed out, like a property damage claim in the early in the fiscal year would be something that we would know we would be getting reimbursed from the insurance company within the fiscal year, but not right away.
So then we'd know. That would be an example of when we would know. What would be an example of when we wouldn't know? But then that triggers the approval in advance by the board.
The state mandated shutdown that prohibits us from billing for some unknown period of time. I mean, we live that example, right?
Jenny?
Yeah, I was just, between listening to Dick and Keith, in section 6, the second paragraph, it does say that the president, CEO will maintain records of the emergency cash reserves and will provide regular reports to the audit committee and the CA board. Is there any way of saying, of pinning that down a little bit more and saying at the next meeting of the audit committee and the CA board? Because this is leaving it could be a year away. Or
I assume that's implied, but I want to keep on track here. So what we're voting on at the meeting is not the policy. This is the current policy.
Right.
So we're not actually voting to change the policy. That's not on the agenda for next meeting. What we're voting on is to approve $3 million to be added to the emergency cash reserves for on this fiscal year. That correct? So in that case, the policy is here for people's information, but what we're actually considering at the next meeting is actually voting to move $3 million into the emergency cash reserves. So I just want to clarify. So that's where the discussion should be. Any further discussion on the cash reserve? Okay, there being none, I will move on to the next topic. Work session topic B is the CA Board of
we spent, we were supposed to spend 10 minutes on that, and it's, a lot longer. So, and it's just more about managing the,
sorry.
Anyway, but managing the meeting time so that we're not constantly moving towards getting out of here.
Yeah, I apologize. It's 6 o'clock.
That's fine. Just pointing it out. I didn't want to let it ride.
The second topic is 40 minutes for CA Board of Operations. So at the last meeting, we discussed establishing 2 committees. One is strategic committee to basically, its main objective for next year would be to look at the CEO hiring process. And the second would be actually, that'd be the oversight committee. The strategic committee would be focusing on the strategic plan, the next 5-year strategic plan, and an oversight committee to focus on the CEO, the process for hiring the next CEO. So these are, so in the packet is the current 5-year strategic plan, which expires this year, and we also have the timeline which we were approved, the timeline for the CEO hiring timeline. So are there any questions or discussion regarding the committees? Ellen?
2 things that I'm just interested in hearing us talk about. What these seem to be are responses to 2 particular initiatives that we know we have coming up. So that raises the question to me of whether these really ought to be more ad hoc committees, or whether these, or are we really talking about how we're organizing the board, or are we just talking about how we respond to these particular ad hoc initiatives that have to happen? Second thing is, my recollection of the procedure to create the last strategic plan was not only were we all involved, but so was the staff, and I really like that in a sense. So I guess I'm not clear I'd love to hear, Andy, you were the one who framed it first, but there might be others, what the thinking is around having a smaller committee to focus on the strategic plan. So those, long-term and the strategic plan itself, those are my two questions.
So, Andy, did you want to respond?
Well, strategic plans, we've done it in a variety of ways.
They're 5-year
plans. The last one we did was significant board involvement at the very beginning, along with community involvement, a whole series of meetings. It did result in the plan we have now, and as Alan said, he thought it was a good process. Before that, the process used actually did not involve the board until the very end, where instead staff and the community developed the strategic ideas, and then toward the end of that process presented it to the board that then had the discussion. So it's kind of like two ends of the board can determine how much it wants to be involved. We can start at the very beginning as we did with the last process, or we could just wait till the very end as we did 2 processes ago. And it really is up to the board. But I think that if we're going to go with, I'll say, a full involvement, part of it, certainly at the beginning, can be handled by a subcommittee, by a committee, instead of trying to get the entire board. Because one of the problems is always finding a date that everybody can make. And that just sometimes is actually harder than the actual discussions.
Dick?
Yeah, the last time around, we had 20 people trying to write a strategic plan, and that's too many. And so I would think the best bet would be to have some small committee come up with a proposal, and it might involve some staff members as well as board members, to at least come up with a draft document that the whole board can consider. But I remember this room was just packed with people, and there were sheets on the wall, and it was a mess. And I'm surprised that the end result came out as well as it did.
Jenny?
Yeah, I could see this subcommittee on the strategic plan coming up with a process and recommending the process with a timeline and who will be involved in the process, et cetera, to the board, and then the board approving it. And then, part of it will include that committee does X amount of work, the community, the staff, and at some point, the whole board does it. So you would approve the process, and they would spend the time working on it, those 5 people. But it has to be an all-inclusive process with everybody
I'd
involved.
be really interested in understanding, once we got the plan, how is it implemented and how is it monitored, and who's responsible for making sure that it actually gets is used. So I don't know if that's a question for Dennis or to some of the people who were on the board before.
Andy, do you have
No, I'll let Bill go first, and then I'll.
Okay.
I think it's important to jump in and once again say that, I think that this board should recommend to the next board to do this, but there will be members here that won't be here for that, and to put conditions on the next board when they should be deciding this for themselves. I mean, Brian has a brilliant question. It's a really good question. I think that is for the next board to decide. We shouldn't be putting our imprint on their work. It is the next board that will decide the next president. They should be they have to set up a committee. They should be charged with doing that. I don't see the wisdom in doing the work for different people who will be sitting in these seats.
Andy?
Actually, I wanted to get back to Alan's question because I thought Alan asked a very good question, which was, and unfortunately I was not at the last meeting, so I was not able to participate in the discussion, but Alan's question was, are we talking about 2 very specific, things that are just going to happen next year and aren't going to happen hopefully for a while? Or are we talking about a a change in the way the board works. Because those are two different things. I mean, one, you've got this big issue coming up. Yeah, we can form subcommittees. Or two, do you want to change how the board works? And I really would like to get a response to Alan is what are we really focusing on? Which way
your thinking when you put this together? Wasn't this your initial?
No.
Well, no. This is
not mine.
No.
I'm sorry.
This is my idea.
But you're always the one who comes up with this.
I sent a different document.
I'll let Keith go and then I'll jump in.
So I think it's interesting. Number one, the two big items that we're talking about are going to take the better part of the year, and there is the opportunity to do more with these committees as we define an actual charter and spell some of that out. So the fact that we can establish something that even if it's going to last for a year, we can always get rid of it, or the next group can get rid of it. But we can really start to formalize and divide and conquer some of the work that we're attempting to get done.
Right.
What I would say, Bill, as I was going back and forth, and I wholeheartedly understand what you're saying in terms of the next board deciding. But part of what I see is we don't leave enough legacy almost and structure, in the sense that there are things that we've learned that we understand and we want to move forward. The cash reserve is a great example of something. If we really had to hand a problem like that off to someone else, we're leaving some knowledge and legacy behind. So I think the idea, even if the next board wants to come in and scrap all of this, okay, which is entirely a possibility, the idea of giving a framework to start with so that we could get started from day one and then build out a charter and make it what we want and provide a structure or a strategy, I think is intriguing, so that we can get some more of the board governance going earlier in the process, as opposed to getting started and then having to build that with a new group.
So and I'll actually address Alan and Bill's and Andy's concern. So one of the ideas is, if we're going to have committees, and as we work through both of these important topics over the next year, one I think the big learning experience for the next board, should we go to this committee structure, is how helpful is it? And if the next board finds that the structure is very helpful, I could see this continuing. If the next board thinks that this was completely off the wall and got in the way, they might decide to go a different route. As far as ad hoc committees, given the experience over the past year and the concerns over ad hoc committees, I would try to avoid ad hoc committees. Just on principle at this point, I would want to make sure that if we're setting up committees, that we make sure all the I's, all the T's are dotted and crossed, and that we really formalize the process. Ginny, then Dick.
Yeah, I want to remind us that the original discussion, I guess a month ago, was, are we interested in having committees, standing committees, subcommittees, whatever we want to call them? And I think the answer was yes. And I secondly totally agree with what you just said, Keith, that we have a certain amount of experience, for good or bad, and we feel, and this is what I got out of the meeting a month ago, that we do need committees to get the work done. And I honestly don't see these two committees as only doing that at all. I see all the governance questions, procedures on how we actually function had better be worked on quickly in one of these committees. So I see them doing a lot more than that. And yes, the next board can say, forget it. But we've at least given them something to think about, and the reason why, and that you cannot function as a board with all the work we have to do unless you have committees. You cannot do it.
Dick?
Well, I think Keith is onto something here. We shouldn't just count on the next board to jump right into the fray and immediately start to operate. I know when I joined the board, it took me about a year to figure out what was going on, and I'm still not always sure. We have a lot of experience here, and this board, particularly over the past year or so, has a pretty good idea of where things could go wrong and what needs to be done to fix them. So I'd hate to see that experience go to waste. And the more we can do to help out the next board, I think the better.
Bill?
Just following up on a few things that have been brought up, I think Jenny's point about making recommendations are great, and I think recommendations are entirely appropriate here. Formalizing this, codifying this, if the next board wants to get to work and they do not agree with this, they then have to take the step to undo this to get started. So we're adding steps for the next board. I'm concerned about that. And you mentioned problems, Keith. I grant that we should not be handing off problems to the next board, or at least minimizing those. I think you said problems like the cash reserve and understanding that.
The problem of knowledge, and the knowledge continuity.
I think that hiring a president and creating a strategic plans are actually opportunities. And I think that that's the key, right? We're handing off an opportunity. I want to make sure that the next board has the greatest latitude to achieve that.
Alan?
Yeah, I guess philosophically, pragmatically, there's certainly such a thing as a next board, in the sense that there'll be people who have more knowledge, more experience, and some people who have less experience, and that's always true. Philosophically, legally, there's no such thing as a next board. It is the CA board. We are the CA board. In 2 months, there'll be the CA board. It'll still be the CA board. Could be all new people, could be all the same people, it's still the CA board. And I guess with the exception of very few things, I don't like handing things off because it does take that ramp up time. And I get the point you're making, Bill, but I don't think it's actually accurate. I don't think they would have to undo it first. They might look, I mean, I'm trying to think of if we do pass this, and now it's in place, but the new board hasn't even created the people on those committees yet, they could sit in their first meeting in May and say, I don't think this is such a great idea, I propose we, and they could just make changes to it right then, before they wouldn't have to go through it and then undo it and then redo something else. So I just think any board should just continue doing what we think is best for the organization, and whoever sits in these seats come May sits in these seats and carries on.
And I'll also point out last year, in this exact same time, we made additional changes to committees that happened to be the advisory committees, which is actually the next topic on the agenda, but the board does operate in April. April is a month on the calendar. It's not a vacation month. It's not August. It's April. Any further discussion? Andy?
Yeah, I'd like to follow up because, I thought Keith had a good point. And it concerns, not so much the decision, but why the decision was made. And we are very, very poor as a board in doing that. In that, if we simply pass this and say we're going to create this new committee structure, then what you do is you hand a bunch of new people a new committee structure, and the first thing they say is, well, why did they do that? Yeah. If you don't have the background, and it isn't just with this, there have been a number of decisions that the board has made that a new set of members come in and kind of say, well, why did you do that? And nobody necessarily knows because we don't kind of provide information. And so I think one of the things we can do, even if it's only recommendations, is say, we recommend this because we've had this problem, we think this helps address it. Just kind of give the stage. Because otherwise, if you simply just make a decision and then the next board is there kind of, next set of people is like, I wonder why they did this.
Andy, I'll be honest, going through this book of policies, I've got the same question over and over and over again through half these policies. It's not a new question you bring up.
Well, we need to do more.
Keith?
Yeah, I guess it's a little bit about process for the next meeting. If we, and I know based upon the things that are in that book that we don't necessarily have to have something drafted today for consideration in the future. I know that technically we can continue moving. We've been discussing this now for two meetings or so. So if we put together some of that information, Andy, that you're talking about, to frame it, and then put together a brief charter explaining, duties and so on and so forth. Can we make that available prior to, I guess, the Friday prior to the next meeting, so that if we decide to put this on the agenda, we can have that available?
We could do that. The other option would be the committees could develop their own charter. That's the other possibility. A lot of times, when committees create, the first thing they do is write their own charter.
And the only reason I was thinking about that is because
they're both possibilities.
I agree with Andy with what you're saying. It's sort of like, okay, you've got these things. Okay, why are we doing this, and what do we do now? So if we're talking about getting running.
But yeah, if you could actually, it's a great idea though. If you could help out and if you can come up with some draft charters before
the Friday before the meeting.
Actually, a couple days beforehand.
Next week.
Yes, next week.
Yeah. So, and give yourself a couple days beforehand, because someone want to edit something. Bill.
I just wanted to respond to the comment about taking days off in our last couple of days here. I came to this meeting prepared to talk about the reserve fund and the ethics policy. This is one particular thing that has far-reaching efforts beyond the term of this board, and that's what I was referring to. I don't want anyone to think that I'm here to take the day off or anything.
I wasn't implying that.
It was said out loud, and I wasn't sure who it was addressed to, so I just wanted to respond.
The point was the board operates in April.
And that's what I'm here for. Absolutely, we should be operating in April. I agree with that.
Yeah, I just want to go back to what I said earlier, especially as what Andy was saying. When you don't know what the reasons behind this strategic plan, and you look in here and it's a really great plan, but then you wonder, well, how was it supposed to be implemented? What were the tools that were going to do that? So what was going to actually make this plan work? And I've got no basis to that. I wasn't there when it was done. It was done back in 2019. So what's happened in the last 4 years? What's worked? What hasn't worked? Was it the implementation plan? So before we give this to someone else to do, there's so many more questions that need to be answered.
What are you referring to back in 2019?
I can follow up with him.
Okay.
It's an excellent point. And if you read it, the idea was, what is the strategic priority? What are the objectives? And that was done with a lot of people involved. And then what should the action steps be? So some of this is spelled out as to what the action steps would be. I think your question really is, are they adequate? And two, who's doing the oversight? Have we actually checked? And so that's what.
And that's part of developing a plan, is the implementation.
The board agenda.
But we're not actually talking about the strategic plan tonight. We're talking about how to develop it.
But you need to know what it is beforehand.
Yeah.
Just for clarification, we are doing a retrospective look at that plan right now. Well, it's starting next week, let's say, but in time for the next board, certainly we'll have some examples. They're great questions. I have the same questions, right?
Oh, okay.
And I want answers, and so, we're looking at that.
Oh, cool. Thanks.
It occurs to me, and it's not the time to have the discussion, but I like the idea of being more fulsome about the background. As one part of that, it seems to me we might want to revisit our minutes policy, because we've got to be very sparing in our minutes. This was proposed, this was the vote, done. I've heard more than once people talk about going back to the actual videos and watching the videos and then getting some more idea of what was going on. But that's very time consuming. If we had some of that in the minutes, people could go back to the minutes and see why something happened.
I agree with you on that on some levels. I think the minutes may not be the place for it, in my opinion. One of the places that I think would be valuable is, let's take the Lake Elkhorn project. As a new board member coming on, it's taken a significant amount of time in terms of reading a bag from Dick on materials, meetings with folks. What would be really cool is when we do major lifts like that, is we've used things in my past life, just called position papers. And at least what it does is, at the time that we did all of these things, here's all of the here's all the major points and the major considerations, so that you can read like a 2 or 3 page document. And if you want to go digging deeper, you can do that. And I think, when I think about board operations, that's something that I'd love to be able to say that, in a year's time, that we'd be able to hand off to, the new board that's saying, okay, here's a book, not a huge thing, but just here's a few things that you really need to get up to speed on, so that you're not completely lost in trying to get caught up as we're having dialogue and there's residents speak out and what does this mean. So I think adopting something like that in an operations discussion would be really, really helpful. It takes time to get that done, and that's why I say it's not a month, it's like a year, right? To try to get ramped up on the 2 or 3 major pieces that we have there. So, minutes versus a position paper, and the position paper we all have to understand that it was written at the time that the decision was made, right? So that it can change, or we can reconsider, what was in there, but at least you knew at that date 2 years ago, all eyes looked at this and said, here are the facts and why we considered it. And I think that would be extremely helpful.
Dennis?
In regard to the minutes, there is a program called Otter AI, and we're starting to use that. And that program is like closed captioning on steroids. It's much better than closed captioning, so we're going to use that. But it's a tremendous lift to do these minutes. This is not, and there are a lot of profound things that are said here, but we don't capture them all. But if you had the written narrative, the text, that would be another tool.
Actually, we don't even have to be here. Just let the AI do it.
ChatGPT is going to take over. Okay, Andy?
I just want to address Brian's point. So when the current strategic plan was adopted, it was adopted also with that there would be yearly updates presented to the board. Mm-hmm. And we did that for the first year, and the board discussed it. And then we got to the second year, and staff developed it, and the board never discussed it. And then we got to the third year, and by then we were getting into the pandemic. Staff did update it, but the board never looked at it. So it depends on what the board wants to do.
Any further comments or questions on the proposed committee structure? Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think we said it, but I don't see it in here. Is the idea is that these 2 committees would meet in 2 different rooms during what we are now using for our work session.
Yeah, so the idea is they would meet either 2 different rooms or 2 different villages. They'd meet at the same time. So you'd have one committee meet place A, one committee meet place B. They would meet during the work session times, but not necessarily all the work session times. So you still have some work sessions and some committee sessions.
And I have some ideas from a charter standpoint, just in terms of respecting the process that we're, trying to all be adults and so on and so forth, is potentially writing into the charter that the committee members are the ones who can discuss and engage and work through a process. And regardless of who else shows up other than residents speak out, we understand that the committee members are the ones who are going to be engaging in that topics in order to at least make an attempt to be respectful of the process and the time and so on and so forth.
That's a good point. Any last comments? Okay.
Well, I want to be clear on what then we're voting on in 2 weeks.
So what we'd be voting on in 2 weeks would be the establishment of a strategic committee with a charge, and if we can actually get a charter for both of these, that would be fantastic, and a oversight committee.
And the schedule?
The schedule is generally prepared by staff between the 2, basically between the last week in April and the first week in May, which gets voted on at the first meeting. So
staff's going to staff's going to decide how many times each committee meets and how many times it's a work session, or
well, the staff sets the. We have a calendar that establishes when all the board meetings are. They're the last Thursday of the month.
That on some of them,
I think we're
they're going to be work sessions, and on some of them, committee meetings. I think we ought to be the deciders on how many times each committee meets.
Eric.
What?
Is that part of
Yeah,
the proposal?
I think we're starting to get specific on this and manage it. I think that is something that's up to the next board and the staff. I don't think we need to spell all that out. It's, exactly the dates and all of that.
Yeah, Dennis, do you have a comment on that? Good. Okay. The only thing that I think I would want to make clear from that, though, is I believe that the idea behind these, because this would be a huge voting piece. The idea behind these, though, in the vote would be that these committees would be replacing the board work sessions. Yes.
Some, not all.
But basically, the idea is that when you have a policy, such as hiring the next CEO or the strategic plan, the committee would craft it. And then when it gets to the point where they feel like, okay, this is at a good enough state where it can now go to the full board, then they would vote on it to send to the full board, and that would go to the full board for deliberation. That's the idea, so that things don't just show up at the full board.
That raises the question, I'm trying to remember, look at our resident historian. When we think of our 2 or 3 meeting rule, did a committee deliberation on something count as one of those?
Yes.
That's what
Yes, as long as it's a board established committee.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some flexibility in the detailed reading of that in terms of what we can present and when. We've adopted a very conservative approach relative to that, but in the reading of that document, there's a little bit more flexibility with what we can bring to the table. Okay, cool. So I think we're out of time for this session.
10 more minutes, we want to keep doing it.
I don't get the sense that people want to keep doing it.
No, Keith gets the 10 minutes. That's actually 11 minutes.
And we went over by 10 minutes from the previous session, so it averages out.
We're back.
So the next topic is 10 minutes for the review of the CA Advisory Committee policy and procedures. So at the end of last year, there was actually we actually voted to change the policy on advisory committees. So previously, there was a board liaison on every single advisory committee, all 11 of them. And at the last board in April, they changed the policy so that the 4 what was called user-focused advisory groups, tennis, aquatics, athletics, and golf, they would no longer have a board liaison. But the other committees, such as Teen Advisory, Senior Committee, Millennial Committee, Watershed Committee, et cetera, they would continue to have liaisons. There was some concern about implementing this policy from this board, actually, in May. And so what we basically decided was, okay, we'll see how this policy works out, give it a year, and then revisit it at the end of the year. So it's now the end of the year, and we're revisiting the policy. So the question before us is something we want to continue this policy, or we could go back to the old policy of having liaisons everywhere, or we could do something completely different, such as either no liaisons or change the liaisons. So that's where we are today. So Alan had his hand up first, so he'll start.
I would love to hear anybody who either was in favor of the current policy or could just dispassionately. I can't figure out a reason why those 4 committees were chosen. In my head, those 4 committees ought to have been the first ones to have liaisons, since those are the user committees. We represent the people of Columbia, and those are our users, and it seems like that's like the overlap that ought to happen. I'm just not at all clear why. I wasn't part of that discussion. I don't know why that happened. Anybody speak for that policy?
Yeah.
Dennis?
So my thought on it is that I don't know that we need to have liaisons for any of the committees. We can post the calendar and the agenda, and board members who have an interest in any of the committees can go to any of them, as well as the public. They're not closed meetings, and so anyone who has a particular interest in a particular group can go. Right now, I would say, we don't have consistent representation in the committee groups. And some we have better than others, and some we have none. And the fact of the matter is that they're open. Anyone who's interested can go, including board. and they can represent themselves at those meetings. So I'm not sure. The downside, I think, is that if you create a system where you have a liaison and they don't go, then what have you done? And you've put more, I don't want to say burden, but board members are responsible for things that they're maybe not as interested in as they otherwise would be. But that's my thought.
Do board members vote on all the advisory committees, or some, or none? Ginny, and then I'll go around.
Oh, were you asked, did you get an answer to the question?
Yeah, the answer is no.
They don't vote?
They don't vote.
Yeah. Okay. Alan, to answer part of the question you had, the 4 committees are based on user, and the chairs of those committees very much said at the meeting that they wanted the CA board members there, so you can give that whatever weight you want. But also, one of the committees that was turned into topic-focused advisory committees was the Arts Center Advisory Committee. I don't understand why that wasn't put into the user committee, because it's usually a facility, like the golf facilities, the tennis facilities, the aquatics, the health and fitness facilities. Well, Arts Center is, I think, a user committee too, so I didn't quite get the logic there. But the other question I have is, can we share with all the 11 committees this report so that we can get the benefit of their impression of what they think they want? And I think we need to do that before the next meeting. That's number 1 in terms of the process. 2, in number 6, recommendation 6, I don't know if we ever did anything on that, because it basically deals with CA Board should decide how it views the purpose and utilization of community engagement focused advisory committees. And those are the millennial, the seniors, the teens committee, how you look at them, et cetera. I don't remember any report coming back where the board or staff did anything on that. So maybe we need to look at that for the next meeting as well. And in number 7, there's some really good recommendations there, but we need a status on what's happening with that. I'd like a lot of the ideas in here, but I'm not sure really how many have actually been implemented in recommendation 7. And the last thing, I'm sorry, but the last thing, my own personal opinion, and listening to all the advisory committees, they felt there was a value in having a CA board member, assuming they showed, to the advisory committees. They felt that was a value. I personally think there is a value to a CA board member attending the committees. If you don't attend, that's, you're not fulfilling your responsibility if you signed up for a committee, but that's your problem. But if you do attend, I think you'll learn a lot. I think you have an opportunity to say to the committee, hey, you should get on Resident Speak Out. You have some great ideas. Just don't wait for the annual report. So in a lot of committees, they really do respect and seem to value a CA board member attending the committees. And I think that's part of, these are our advisory committees. Why wouldn't we want to get advice from them? So
just to clarify, these recommendations were actually written last year?
Yeah.
So the committees should all have them, and they're also in the packet?
Well.
So just wanted to clarify.
I doubt that they've been notified that this is happening, but.
Bill?
Maybe they have.
I kind of want to echo a little bit of what's been going on here. We don't have any information in 10 months' time from any of the committees as to how they feel about this. And I think their input is critical on this. And then I'd like to speak for a moment as somebody who was a 10-year veteran member of the Aquatics Advisory Committee. And I want to congratulate both Ginny and Alan for when they served as the liaisons. They attended fairly regularly and did a great job.
I also attended.
And many other board members did not. And we felt very ignored as an advisory committee. I think that a lot of people reacted to the removal of the assignment of a board member because they felt that there was no mechanism for them to come to the board. And if we don't if we don't have people assigned to be liaisons, we need to set up a mechanism for regular interaction with these advisory committees as a committee as a whole, so that they can exchange ideas with us as far as what's going on in the fitness centers or the swimming pools or the open space or what have you. And that's part of what we need, and that's why we have those committees. So whether or not there is an official liaison appointed and that liaison does the job of showing up is part of this discussion. But the other question is that the best way for information to be conveyed from the advisory committee for whatever its specific focus to the board? I think we need to consider both.
So are you recommending putting liaisons back on all the committees?
I'm sorry?
Are you recommending putting liaisons back on all the committees?
I'm recommending that we get more data from the committees, and then I think we ought to have this discussion of what's the best way for us to interact with the committees. If the board decides that the liaison structure is the proper way to do it, then we move forward in a responsible way to do that. If we think that it's better to do it another way, then we move forward in that way. We should really discuss what's the best way to exchange information with these groups.
Andy?
So one of the difficulties, and I mean, one of the reasons there were recommendations that came out is that, many years ago we started establishing advisory committees, and then basically the board has had no interaction with the advisory committees. Maybe once a year they used to come and give a report. Okay, but we as a board never made use of our advisory committees in the last couple of years. And so it gets to the point that Bill really raised is well, what is the purpose of these advisory committees and how should the board interact with them? Most of the advisory committees now really provide advice to staff. I mean, and they do have significant input into staff, which is exactly probably where they should have input. They have far more input into staff than they ever do to the board. And so, part of it is you're right, is do we even need board liaisons? Because most of these committees function well as input to staff into their particular areas. And, maybe what we really need to do is figure out how we get better feedback from them. But I can tell you, having them all come and give a report doesn't work. I mean, it has not worked for years. It has not worked for years. And so it's like, we got to think of something else. If we really want to interact with the advisory committees, we have got to rethink this whole idea. Okay. We got to figure out a way to do it.
So we're out of time. Do people want an extra 5 minutes to discuss this?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, put an extra 5 minutes on. I'll go to Keith.
So I think we need to hear from the committees in terms of how we need to operate, but I also think we need to drive how we want to utilize the committee, and we need to task committee in certain senses. If the board needs something, we need to get that research done and use the committee potentially to help us with that. But then I also look at it and I think about the amount of time that one needs to commit to this board, and when we talk about the number of additional committees that we need to sit on, and then there's the village board, and there's this board, and then if we're doing our due diligence, we're probably investigating and understanding some deeper things in some other areas. And one of the things I'd like us to consider in all of these conversations is really, the diversity of the board, in the sense that who has the time to do what's needed, right? So can we attract the depth and breadth of people that we need to, if we're asking them to do a part-time job for free, when you've got a full-time job that you're trying to carry out. So I think as we're having these conversations, we need to understand how do we leverage, or how do we utilize these groups to help us get our jobs done. That's what we're really here to do, right, is to represent the community. So if we can get other people to come in and provide, they're passionate about it, they can provide that advice and that guidance, I think that's pretty meaningful. And it has the additional benefit of allowing more people who have less time available to be involved in the Columbia Association Board without feeling like it's an overwhelming responsibility.
Okay, so we got a couple minutes left, so Dick?
I was on the Health and Fitness Committee and Advisory Committee, and I found it very useful. It was a chance for me to hear some other information and see what people are concerned about. And I think it made me a better board member. I would at times maybe tell the committee what what was going on in something, or some way be helpful. But I really recommend that we have that board input. And I do think the idea of the committee reporting to the appropriate staff members, though, having some kind of a channel there makes a lot of sense, because these advisory boards only meet 4 times a year, and to wait for an annual report or whatever doesn't really make much sense.
Alan?
Yeah, 100% in agreement. The parade of advisory committees is not the way to do it. And I've always been an advocate of maybe having one a month come through, but that's always been voted down. I think we need to decide which are board advisory committees and which are staff advisory committees.
Yeah.
Make that decision. And exactly how do we want to interface with the board advisory committees, the staff advisory committees? It's up to the staff to decide how to do that. But I just think that if they are board advisory committees, they need to advise the board, and we need to figure out how to maximize the advice that we are getting from them.
Bill?
And just one last point on this.
Okay.
Is there someone else, or may I?
Yeah, and I'll get to Lynn.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. Just one last point I wanted to make. I understand the point, and I agree with the point that having everybody come through and have all the committees report out on one night is not an efficient use of time for either the boards or for this board. But I also wonder and think, when else was advisory board business discussed at this level, at the CA board level? I know that Ginny has mentioned stuff with the soon-to-be renamed Senior Advisory Committee, has brought that to our attention a couple of times this year. And I can only think of 1 or 2 maybe mentions. If we were talking about pools, maybe an Aquatics Advisory Committee opinion was mentioned. But that was it. We really didn't talk about what the advisory committees wanted to do here at this level much at all. So even if we have presence there, is that communication actually getting back to the rest of us? I agree with Dick that it's enriching to do, but the actual sharing of that information with the rest of us is also problematic. We need to address that.
Lynn, I'll give you the last word.
Okay. Yeah, I think, again, I was on the Golf Advisory Committee for, 2 years, 3 years maybe. And again, the meetings were very helpful, friendly. Staff was always there. We could tell what was going on. There was very little to report back to the board other than things seem to be going fine, that kind of thing. However, I think it's really important that we have some system in place so that when there is an issue, especially for some of these committees, for instance, on the golf committee, we haven't discussed Fairway Hills in at least 3 years. But when that becomes an issue, I think that's going to be very critical for the golf community. And that's where, we may want to have more interaction. So we might want to see if there's a way to have an ongoing relationship that becomes more intense or more important when there's a real issue that's important. I don't know that being at every meeting meets that need. But certainly when something happens, there should be some connection for these different committees. It could be through the staff, to bring some of these issues, to give them a way to be heard. Because these are the facilities that we count on for the health of our organization.
Okay, so we're about out of time for this. So this is what I'm hearing. I'm hearing basically 2 different viewpoints. I'm hearing one viewpoint where let's go back to having liaisons for all 11 committees. I also hear the viewpoint that let's have no liaisons and have a different means of communicating with the advisory committees. So what I'd recommend for the next meeting is let's vote on both. Have first vote on one. If that passes, or if that fails, then vote on the other option. So at least we present the board both options. We can vote on both. If we do decide to take all the liaisons off, we should certainly think about how that new communication structure would work. Does that make sense, Dennis?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Just 2 seconds. I feel like what we've described here is a lot more complex than two things to vote on. Does this one work or does that one work? And I'm almost wondering if the vote on the table is to delegate this to
committee
and I, whether it be the oversight or the, whatever committee, and saying that, it needs to be debated and discussed so we can get a reasonable solution, because, voting on two, we're going to split, whatever the case may be, we'll get something, then we'll come back to it a year later. So, I would hope that we wouldn't do that, and that we would put the work in to just get it done and, fix the issues that we talked about.
I don't think the grand plan is going to happen in the next 2 weeks, because you'd have to come up with an idea, and then that would have to go through a meeting and another meeting. But I think.
So I guess we could table it then. Is what we could do.
So there's three options. You could vote on one, vote on the other. They could both be turned down, and we're back where we started from, and we can go back to trying to figure out a better way. So at least this gives us the option to add liaisons or take away liaisons. Dennis?
So what I was going to say is that it seems to me that what we would like to do is to have staff write kind of a background position paper, like an executive summary of where we are, what we've done, what the status is, are we on the website, all the facts, and then give the board more information, they can make a decision.
But yeah, I think the confusing part is there's some committees that have one set of communications and another set of committees that have a completely different, and I think it'd be helpful if we had the same for everyone. So that brings us to 4D, the ethics policy discussion. So I'm going to take this in two parts. So in our packet, we have a revised code, and we'll discuss that first.
Yeah.
And then after that, we'll discuss the revised enforcement policy. That's also in our packet, and we've got an updated one that just came out. So in addition, we also have recommendations from council. So with that, I will open it up.
Chair, can I have a point of inquiry?
Sure.
Are we going to be publicly announcing opinions we've received from council in this meeting?
What?
Are we going to be publicly stating opinions we've received from council in this meeting?
They're already here.
All right, understood.
So this is a public document. It's on the web.
All right.
Okay.
I guess a point of inquiry: Are we going to be debating laws at this meeting? Or in this
hope
conversation?
We're not debating laws. We're hopefully debating an ethics policy.
Okay.
We're not in the position to pass law.
No, but that policy needs to follow.
The policy needs to follow the law, but the idea is that we have an updated proposed ethics policy in front of us. So the key thing is, what, if any, changes to the red mark draft do we want to see before it comes to a vote in 2 weeks?
Thank you for your question.
Dick?
The red line version, when all the lines are taken out and that you get one policy, it looks pretty good. This is the one we got from the law firm. And the only change I see that needed there is you've got conflict of interest in two piece places, and that should be merged. And that's easy enough to do. There are some questions that need to be answered before we finalize a document. And one of them was not mentioned here is what is a meeting? And there's been some discussion about which subcommittees, which work groups, who has to make, when are we doing business? And when do we need to have an agenda? When do we have to have minutes? That's question number one, and that has not been addressed yet. And the second thing is the Inner Arbor recusal issue. I think this is something we really need to talk about. And to have the two people who are crossover board members have to recuse themselves when they're the ones who probably know the most about the subject matter seems a little extreme. And so maybe we need some policies in there. But I think in most cases, the CA board members are there at the Inner Arbor Board to represent CA. And when they come back here, they're still representing CA. That's where the loyalty is. And they come back with a lot of information that's useful to CA. So that's another area where we have to have some discussion. There seems to be some vagueness as to when there is a conflict of interest as opposed to a perceived or possible conflict of interest. And so you're supposed to announce you have a conflict, but maybe you should just be announcing you might have a conflict. And I think that has to be clarified because I don't want people just ruled out because they happen to know something about the subject. Another thing that has come up, and this I guess will be part two of the discussion, is whether we have an ethics committee or not. And the one thing that I agree is, I think we all agree, is that and this is in the legal opinion as well, is you can't have the board chair or whoever substitutes for the board chair just kill an investigation. It can recommend, make a recommendation, but not just say, ignore it. And that, again, is part of the enforcement policy. So the things I think we need to discuss is what is a meeting, what about Inner Arbor recusal, and the rest of it is easy to fix.
So 2 points of information. So with your concern about the Inner Arbor Trust, that's actually a policy change from our current policy to the proposed policy. So the current policy states that there is no conflict of interest between the board and IAT. Mm-hmm. What you're stating that there is a perceived conflict of interest between the board and IAT, that would be a policy change in this version.
Yeah. So my thing was, let's keep what we have and not change that. But this is a subject of discussion.
Yes, and the second point of information with regard to the enforcement piece, in the enforcement revised enforcement mechanism, that's revised to make it clear that the chair or whoever receives a complaint can't unilaterally dismiss it.
Okay, good. So I think
a point of information is used to request information, not to provide information.
Well,
I keep on forgetting that.
I'll accept what.
Sorry about that.
Raising your hand and getting in the queue is provided.
Okay. Any questions on the? We'll start with the code piece. Any questions or comments on the code in front of us? Going once. Going Andy.
Yeah, actually, I think my question has to do with on page 7 when it talks about the board speaking. Page 7 of the colored
Section 4.
Section 4, Section 4, civility.
Section 4.
Civility policy.
Civility policy at the very end, the last paragraph. It talked about, board members shall not speak to the public regarding matters considered by the board unless specifically authorized to do so. And then I contrasted that with the question that was asked was when a board member may share opinions with the public.
Right, were you not? You weren't.
No, I wasn't there.
So it came up, Keith had raised that point, and so the purpose of number 1 in this list was to say, yeah, good point. So what we are going to do is a cross-reference to clarify when it's appropriate for a board member to speak in their personal capacity versus in their capacity as a board member.
So this document doesn't.
Right, but that was.
Well, that's because we haven't updated the document.
Okay, so this will be.
But what we say here is that this is what we're recommending.
Okay, so this document is going to be updated before the.
Yeah,
for the
unless we have all of the feedback and
okay.
I know what changes I'm supposed to make.
Okay.
So So where my, I'll say my problem or my misunderstanding is occurring is if this board takes a vote, I can certainly go out and tell the public that the board voted to, revise advisory committees. I mean, the vote was taken in public. I mean, and so I don't need the authorization of the board to go out and tell people that the board made this decision. Right.
I think this came up more in the context of where an individual board member didn't like the decision.
No, yes, I understand that. But the problem is when you read it, it talks about, shall not speak to the public regarding matters considered by the board. And I was thinking like, well, no, I want to go back and be able to tell people, yeah, the board, because I do get questions, how did the board vote? Did they approve the easement? Did they not approve? Yeah, the board approved the easement. It's in the public record. Now, there's a difference between opinions, okay? And I'll say the difference in my mind is if there's a fact that occurred, if the board did something in public session or something, I don't see any problem with me relaying the fact that the board did X or that this occurred or the board didn't do X. We discussed it, but we made no decision. Versus an opinion as, well, I think we should have done this or I think we should have done that. And so I can understand when we were talking more of the opinion type things. But I do want to make sure that we can still tell people what the board did.
And again, unless people have an issue with that, I mean, certainly as part of the rewrite of this section, I can add a clarification that this doesn't preclude a board member from confirming matters of record.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
If everyone's okay with that.
The second thing I wanted to say was, back in April of 2015, the board passed a definition of a meeting. And so technically, we still have on the books, the official board view on what is a meeting. And since we haven't changed that, that's still the board's position.
Which says?
It says meeting must have been properly called, chair, vice chair, whoever. Quorum must be present, and the reason for the meeting must be to transact the business of the board by considering a matter specifically before the board for deliberation or voting. So that's what we adopted as a definition of a meeting.
I'm sorry, is the definition of a meeting in the ethics policy?
That's what I was...
No, but Dick had asked, we need to define a meeting, and all I'm saying...
I understand, but it's not in the ethics policy we're discussing right now, so we should... I move for orders of the day.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. It's not in the ethics policy. We're not considering the meeting policy. Ginny, did you?
No, I was going to.
The reason I bring it up
We're not talking about meetings.
Yeah.
Orders of the day.
The reason I bring it up is that we have been accused of...
I'm sorry, Dick. Orders of the day.
Dick.
We've been accused of an ethics violation.
Okay, what does this have to do with the ethics policy? Specifically, where are we on the ethics policy?
We're accused of a violation
of the ethics
of
policy.
Maryland state law.
Right. Orders of the day.
I would suggest that we abandon this discussion at this point and move on to what the ethics policy is. We're getting in very dangerous.
We got it.
Yeah.
So any further comments on the ethics policy, which is on the agenda? Alan.
Yeah. Regarding comment, like whatever that's called, number 3, response and recommendation. I get the first half that when we are voting as a resident of our village, we can vote for ourselves. But the second example about board members voting on the annual charge rate and cap, that is when we're a board member, and yet we're voting on things that we have a direct personal financial interest in.
But your only duty in connection with that vote is as a member of the board of CA. It's not in your personal.
That's our only duty. That would be my only duty if I wanted to vote for my daughter to be president of CA.
Well, I'll tell you what, if you really are conflicted, you should recuse yourself.
Okay.
I'm not, but the point is that that's an example of
It's
how
not.
this is so
It's
schmirgle.
not. That would be like saying nobody in Congress could vote on a budget because they're personally impacted.
Well, exactly. So how do we draw the line? How do we draw the line between something that quite clearly we have a personal stake in, but we're saying, well, because we always do it, and because Congress does it, we do it.
Because you're not representing yourself in that vote. You are
But
not
I would-
supposed to be.
Okay, so now I've got my daughter who's up for becoming, she's not. but-
Well, she decides to run for the board of CA. You can
No, she
certainly vote.
wants to become CA president,
Would that be in the best interest as a board member?
and I have a vote in it, and my only perp duty is to represent CA.
Is only to represent CA. Your daughter does not play into that. If she's truly the best person, I mean, I would disclose it because I think it's a conflict.
I could disclose it, but it says earlier it says should voluntarily, later.
I think that goes under.
Rabbit hole.
But
And if you really think it's a problem, recuse
but
yourself.
I
Obviously, somebody's got to vote on the budget.
I will tell you what the line is. That, I think, goes against our nepotism policy.
Well, so it's a company that I own, whatever, but, you know, the question is about direct personal financial interests. So where does the line
I'm
get
sorry, I just don't have a better answer for you.
But
Probably recuse yourself, otherwise I think we just carry on.
Because this actually bothered me last week, so I did look this up, to Alan's point. There is actually very, very recent, I'm not sure if maybe it's even too many people are tracking this, there was a very recent decision of the court, whatever we're calling the Court of Special Appeals now, the intermediate, I don't know what we call it, but they decided last year in a case involving a condo association where the board of directors voted to impose a special assessment on all the condo owners for a new roof. And somebody went to court and said, well, everyone on the condo board lives in a unit that has a roof, and it's not fair to the condo unit owners that don't have a roofed unit. And sure enough, the Court of Special Appeals sent that case back and said, okay, we need to make sure that this transaction was in the best interests of the entire condo association to impose a special assessment on all the condo owners. So I don't know. It seems Alan's question does seem somewhat relevant in that spirit.
Yeah, I do have two questions. My first question is on your Part 5, Section 2, to address a specific question regarding voting rights. The charter states that each director is entitled to vote. Each director entitled to vote has a right to cast that vote. This does not prevent the board via the ethics policy, for example, I guess, from establishing situations where a board member is not entitled to vote. So, I mean, could the board pass a policy that says that anyone from a village that starts with O is not entitled to vote?
Technically, yes, you could. I'm not sure how you would support that or justify it to your constituent body.
Well, I come from a village that starts with R.
Yeah, you're just attacking my village, on ground.
If you've got a rational basis and can support it, go for it.
I mean, that strikes me as pretty dangerous.
Well, yes, taking an action to preclude people from voting based on their last name is a rather dangerous position to be taking. Saying that somebody who's the subject of an ethics complaint, for example, should be able to vote on that matter would not be a dangerous decision. It would be a logical decision.
But my
I'm sorry, just because this will come up in a bit, can you say that again?
It would not make sense for the subject of an ethics complaint to be voting on the disposition of that complaint. So that would be a great example of when it would be appropriate to say a board member is not eligible to vote.
Okay, understand.
I mean, but again, what if a board member's on IAT and the question of a grant for IT comes up?
Well, we've talked about that quite a bit.
Yes, we have.
And the guidance that you've gotten from my firm, from Venable, from your two prior general counsel, is that that is a conflict. And certainly the non-conflicted members could vote to allow that person to participate. Not following that procedure could have legal implications on the vote.
So I will point out that the non-conflicted members have already voted for that because we actually have passed a policy a while back that says there's no conflict between INT and the board. So the board actually took that vote.
Yeah, I know, and again, that is, again, the board can take votes like that. I'm not sure that a global vote like that is appropriate because you don't know when you take that vote what sorts of matters are ultimately going to be coming before this board. Each one really needs its own vote.
Ginny, do you?
Yeah. Were you just saying that if there's an ethics complaint filed against, which has happened, 6 members of the board by an individual, that those 6 members can't vote?
Yeah.
And the
41.
remaining members could wind up kicking off the 6 members of the board, then a majority of the you'd only have 4 members voting then.
I understand that, and it's
No, I mean,
fascinating
that's
to me that we're in that
reality.
predicament, but yes.
Yeah, that was reality. So it could mean that 4 people are going to be able to vote if you get a majority of those 4, 3-1, to kick off 6 other members of the board, to remove 6 other members of the board.
Right, now, I mean, I would
envision
that there would be separate votes. I don't know that.
Why would there be separate votes? If somebody filed an ethics complaint, has filed an ethics complaint against 6 members of the board, why would you handle them individually?
Because each complaint should be evaluated on its own.
No, the complaint would be.
You're getting the answer you want.
What?
That was the answer we
I mean,
you
I
wanted.
gave you the answer, yes. The non-conflicted members are the ones taking the vote.
Phil?
First of all, Ginny, you were getting really close to disclosing closed meeting
Well, I'm trying
matters.
to. She's
If we're going to have a closed meeting about this and talk about this in a closed meeting, that's fine, but I think you're getting really close.
Well, she raised it that.
No, you raised the specifics.
Point taken.
Okay. Secondly, I think there are more steps that you are not considering. If there are a majority of the board members who, for some reason, in a general case, were brought up on an ethics charge, and there were a minority member of the board that had to review the information, there would have to be a finding of fact, there would have to be a discussion of what was going on, and then they would have to actually vote for each member whether to mete out any I'm struggling for the word, any kind of consequence. Very good, thank you. For each member. Now, does that mean that all 6 would get kicked off automatically? No, this would be an entire process. Third piece, this is why this board adopted the recommendation to impanel a separate ethics committee so that we wouldn't get in a situation where you have this kind of thing going on. Last point. If there's something that ever went on this board ever in which a majority of the people were charged with unethical behavior, that should be a big warning sign that something very wrong is going on, if that ever happened. So we need to consider all of those things.
Josh?
I just want to respond to that. I mean, and I understand what you're saying, Bill, but that's precisely my problem from the beginning, is that we made a decision to allow the opinion of council to be shared in an open meeting, and that's fine, but then there are other opinions, and because you brought it up, I'll say it. The Venable opinion, which is not for which the public is not privy to. We're talking about the Venable opinion, even though that was something that we were told we're not allowed to share. And then to Bill's point, we can't reveal. We're picking and choosing the element. We're picking and choosing the things we want to share with the public, and I have a problem with that. And that's where some of these ideas are getting weaponized, and I have a problem with that.
Anyway, I'd request that people, because we're in a public meeting, stick to very hypothetical situations. I realize it's not necessarily the easiest thing to discuss, but just to be safe, just please be very hypothetical.
We're very dangerous here.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking people.
Why are we having this? I mean, if we're getting the opinion of council, we shouldn't be having it in an open session.
We are having an opinion about a policy, a general policy.
One person at a time. We're discussing the policy. Jackie.
Venable recommendations about this were made public.
Okay.
Put into a separate public document.
So I can ask then.
So, Alan? Okay. That still leaves me confused. I mean, we have a charter, we have bylaws, and I find it hard to believe that our charter and bylaws allows us to pass a policy that theoretically allows the board to disqualify a member from voting for whatever reason. their first name starts with whatever letter, or their village starts with whatever letter. I find that hard to believe that our charter and bylaws allows for such action.
Wouldn't a lawsuit or something like that take care of that? I don't know. I mean, if something like that, if we decided to go and vote on something that was like that, wouldn't we be challenged on that?
I mean, that's what I'm saying. I find it hard to believe that
But there's lots of things that aren't explicitly written.
Our bylaws and charter allow for, which would lead to a lawsuit.
But why open the door to allow for it?
Yeah, well,
but there's lots of things we can argue that, though. I mean, the whole body of law, we're not going to be able to document every scenario, but if we do something that steps across that line, someone's going to hold us accountable in terms of taking us to court or filing a complaint or something like that.
My point is taking away a vote from forcibly taking away a vote from a board member seems to cross that line.
Okay.
Dick?
Yes. One of the things in our bylaws is that we follow Robert's Rules of Order. And Robert's Rules of Order specifically says, I didn't bring my copy with me, but it says a member cannot be compelled to recuse themselves. That's in Robert's Rules of Order. Cannot be compelled. So.
I believe, at least my copy, I think at the top of it, they're guidelines in order to help facilitate meeting process. And we've established that we are comfortable with Robert's Rules of Order version 2, 10. I don't remember which version it was, but at the end of the day, they're guidelines that we've chosen to adopt, not laws, right? Not specific. Because we don't follow all of the rules of Robert's Rules of Order. Otherwise, we would be in a whole host of trouble here.
we try our best.
Yeah, and I respect that. But
Alan.
Yeah, I just want to concur with you, Eric, that our charter is clear, and I don't think we can create a policy that's in violation of our charter.
I'll just say that that's not true. You may vote to create a policy that changes the voting rights. So, I mean, you may choose not to do that, but there's no impediment in your documents or law in you doing that.
So what's the point of the charter?
The charter forms the entity. It's the mission statement. It talks about how long it's in existence for, what it's supposed to be, to do as an organization. So in this case, own and operate open space. But there's nothing in your documents that prohibits the board from adopting policies that create situations when somebody is not entitled to vote. And certainly a situation like what we've been discussing, which is where there's an inherent conflict that you just can't get around, that person should not be voting.
You use words like certainly and should, and I hear that that's your opinion.
Yes, it's the legal guidance that we're giving you, and practical guidance.
Bill.
I just want the board to contemplate the scenario within the ethics policy here. If a member is named in a complaint or is named as the person making the complaint, should they also be a deciding vote on that particular complaint? To be, the imperfect analogy is the legal system, but should you be a defendant and on a jury at the same time? And if what you're saying that they should always be able to vote, you're then endorsing that idea that defendant and jury is consistent and the proper execution of good decision making, which I have to say is absolutely wrong. You cannot be a named person and then vote on that particular matter. That there is a decision that has to be separated there.
So we're currently out of time. Can I get another 15 minutes for this discussion? Because we haven't even hit the enforcement piece yet.
Well,
without objection?
Yet all we've talked about is enforcement.
Can we switch then to the next topic? We're going round and round, and I think at the end of the day we have to throw it out there, and we either approve it or we don't, and then suffer whatever consequences.
Amendments.
But Alan?
Sounds right.
I'm going to ask you, Bill, specifically. So if that's the position, how do you get around that people can file ethics complaints anonymously? And that could be the other 4 members of the board, if you vote 2 members or whatever it is, and don't have a responsibility to recuse themselves.
That's a good point.
And we won't know, and they can end up voting.
Right.
Well, First of all, there is not total anonymity in this. There's got to be some method of communication. Someone in the organization would know. Secondly, I don't have a good answer for you, but I know that other organizations have found workarounds, working with expert legal counsel, have found a way to do this. And thirdly, if we're working with the recommendations that we adopted of providing a separate ethics committee to handle these, then it gets adjudicated in that exterior panel. And I think much of the concern we have, which is valid, does go away. So I hope that helps inform an answer for you.
But although, Bill, there is a mechanism for total anonymity.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say.
So you could file a complaint with
It's
total
been done.
anonymity. It's possible.
So then is it ethical for a board member to file anonymously and then decide not to, I don't know. I'm looking at this in terms of personal accountability and saying, all right, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm going to recuse myself when I feel it's appropriate.
The question I have is that...
Ethics Committee help with this concern?
Yeah. Well, we've said we're going to, right?
Yes. Well, okay, so that's here. Can I think that's kind of the problem we're having is
It's happened.
I think the problem is twofold. One, I think there's a broad definition of what is a matter involving that individual. So, for example, if I file an ethics complaint against Dick and then Dick files an ethics complaint against me, are we both prohibited from voting on both sets of complaints? So it's 8 people are going to decide, and then what are the other matters that could possibly be associated with the ethics complaint? That's hypothetical number one. And I think the problem with, and the reason I think people are concerned about the idea of a committee is we want these matters addressed quickly. And I think that's been the concern that's been raised because not having the power to vote on matters, it becomes a de facto suspension.
Well,
and so the idea that a committee could potentially just squat on a complaint as a way to suppress you from voting.
Well, no, I mean,
and we have a lot of 5-5, 6-4 votes, and what's the easiest way to manipulate that is file ethics complaints.
But remember, the Ethics Committee isn't made up of this board. The Ethics Committee would be made up of other people, right? I mean, at least that's the
I thought there was
assumption
one
we
or
were
two.
making.
No, it's not what was.
I'm not supporting an ethics committee.
So I guess let's get back to sort of the high level question. I think the high level question is we have an ethics policy. So I think the question before this board, especially in 2 weeks, is why do we need to replace our current ethics policy, which we have and we've all signed, with this ethics policy? Why is there a change needed? Dick.
Well, there are a number of reasons, and one of them is it's a badly written ethics policy that tries to, it comes in 4 pieces, it's 30 pages long, it contradicts itself, and it needs to be cleaned up. And that's why we need a new policy. And also, situations have come up since that policy was written as we say, there have been some hypothetical cases where that policy has proven inadequate. So it does need to be changed. I think the Miles and Stockbridge version is pretty darn good, although I would suggest we merge the 2 conflict of interest pieces into one simple statement. And we could have something to vote on at the next meeting.
Bill?
Let me just say briefly in answer to your question, Eric. The last 10 months on this board is a perfect example as to why we need to have new ethics policies. Not speaking to anything in specific, but I'll tell you what, the last 10 months, anybody that knows.
So I don't know, and I don't know, but I've heard and understand, and now that I'm on the board, I have a deeper sense for things. And I would hope that the board, even given an updated ethics policy, would handle each of these situations differently. We'd have a better mechanism for processing things, and frankly, we might stop things, really early on and get to the bottom of things and either formulate policy or something to change so that we don't wait 10, 12, whatever months. We fix the problem right there and then, and we deal with it. I'm just hoping that we're learning from what happened there, and I don't know that we can write everything and every scenario that we need to cover within this policy, but I sure hope that we've learned from all the bumps and bruises along the way.
So we've got about 9 minutes left in this section. I think the key thing is how are we going to press forward with this in the next meeting? So the next meeting, there'll be a vote on this policy as redlined. I think when will you be able to provide an updated version?
If I don't get to it tomorrow, it'll certainly be the early part of next week. But just to confirm, the only thing I'm changing is just clarifying that when you can speak and when you can't speak part.
That's the only thing that I think we've got consensus. Wait. That's the only thing I think we've got consensus over. The other thing that I think board members might want to do is, because I've heard some concerns about various aspects of it that don't have unanimous consensus. So what I'd also recommend is if you have an amendment that you want to see a line changed or a section changed, please submit that ahead of time so we can get those all in the packet and we can vote on the amendments one by one. Does that fair?
I agree with that, but there is the question of having two separate conflict of interest pieces in one document.
One is specific to the board, and the other is for everybody, because remember, this document covers
Well, this document was
team members
supposed
as
to
well.
be for the board. For the board.
It
We
is
wanted
not.
a specific document, ethics document for the board. The problem we had with the old document is it was all over the map and you had to switch from here to there and back and forth. Now, this is a board ethics policy, and the board has certain responsibilities that go beyond what regular employees have.
So could I recommend that if there's a code of ethics, if there's a conflict of interest policy for the board and staff, can in the title please note who it applies to?
It is in there.
Well, no, when I see the table of contents, I see conflict of interest policy, and then below here, I see another conflict of interest policy, I think.
They're different.
And so what, if
Wait, I'm sorry, I'm looking at this.
Oh, I see a conflict of interest policy.
I want to try to help you here. So I see in section 5.
I see 5 point,
conflict of interest.
and then I see in section 6.03 conflict of interest.
So you'd like me to
If you can
change the title of that?
If you can specify if they apply to two different bodies or two different groups, please specify in the title so it's clear. Dick?
The board has certain conflicts of interest that are different from other people. And that was the whole idea of having an ethics policy that was for the board. And the ethics policy for ordinary employees is an HR matter. And they can take as much of this as they want. And if they want to put a different conflict of interest thing in here, it doesn't belong in the one for the board. So I would just say take the conflict of interest policy and merge all this stuff into one conflict of interest statement that's not contradictory, that does not apply anywhere other than the board. And the board is held to a higher standard. You put this other stuff in, it just causes confusion. So I do think you need to merge that.
If I could then just make a point of clarification. If this group really does want two separate policies, one for board senior staff, or one for board, one for senior staff, one for everybody else, I can do that.
We've already
The
got
language
that.
that's in here right now, all of it applies to the board.
Yes, it does.
Okay.
That's why we should only have one conflict of interest.
But then
piece in it.
are you asking me to create policy number 2 that applies only to senior staff and policy number 3?
No.
At this point, so let me try to get this straight. So right now we have a proposed CA Code of Business Conduct and Policies. This would replace the 3 ethics policies that are currently on the books, correct? So this will apply because that replaces the general code and all the special policies that pertain to senior staff and the board of directors. So this replaces 3 policies. So what we will be voting on at the next session is to be a motion to move this to approve this, replacing those 3 other documents.
Correct.
so this has to apply to everyone because this would be replacing those 3
Well,
documents.
there are 4 documents.
This replaces 3 of them. There's a 4th one that's, the enforcement piece is the 4th one. This does not cover enforcement.
No,
So this,
having studied this pretty carefully, I can tell you that there are 4 separate documents.
I understand. This replaces 3 of them.
Well, then, if we're going to, are you going to have every lifeguard and lawnmower person go through this?
That's what this says.
That is not what the intention was when Andy and I were preparing it. This was, the intention was that this would be for the board of directors ethics.
So if we do that, now we have a 5th policy.
We don't.
So
the board has a ethics policy that includes everything that the board needs to know about. And if HR wants to use as much of this as they can, that's fine. But the ethics policy for the ordinary employee is not the same ethics policy for the board. We have higher responsibilities, and we don't want to go flipping through this thing saying, oh, that's for them, this is for that, wait, that other thing is for here. We wanted a simple, easy policy. We've reduced it down to 12 pages.
I get what you're saying. What this board needs to know going into the next meeting is when this passes, what is repealed? What does this replace?
Everything.
Then this applies to everyone.
HR can put together an ethics policy for employees.
This A can't replace everything because it doesn't cover enforcement. B, if it replaces everything, then it's got to cover everyone because it's replaced everything. So if this is replacing, quote, everything, this
is replacing everything that involved the board in the previous. We've been doing this for a year now.
I know,
and I can't believe at the last minute you don't understand what this is.
I understand what it is. What we need to know when we create the agenda for next week is we're going to have a motion to approve this policy and repeal existing policies. We need to know which policies are being repealed. Jackie.
The way that you just described it, Eric, is exactly what this is. So I'm not going to repeat it. What you said is exactly what it is. It needs to guide the entire organization. If you were to carve out just the board, you would end up with redundancies, which was part of the purpose of revising the policies in the first place, was to streamline them. So the general code of business conduct that applies to everyone, that's everyone. That's from the lifeguard all the way through to the board of directors. And then there are certain sections that are specific to certain groups. And that was the streamlining that took place.
Yeah, so it's got to be clear in the motion at the last meeting what this replaces. Keith?
I think there's the content of the ethics policy that we're voting on, and then you already said it before, and I don't remember the thing that you said in terms of like that terminology to get it back on track, but if people, what you said is if people want to submit amendments to the policy, we can do that, and that includes submitting a recommendation or amendment to split it back out to where we were.
You could do that too.
Right. So I mean, instead of debating it here, it can be submitted.
The goal right now, especially at this hour, is to figure out what the motions are for 2 weeks, so it can go on the agenda. Alan.
What's the purpose of having conflict of interest show up in 2 places?
Honestly, it's semantic. It's just wording, and I can clarify that.
Yeah,
Section 5 doesn't apply to the entire universe of CA, whereas Section 603 would apply to the universe of CA.
Yeah,
that's also not stated in the title of Section 4.
We actually we discussed that.
Go to the introduction of the document. It specifically tells you what section.
And we've already requested that the title be.
We requested the title of Section 5.
Both titles be clarified.
I can clarify Section 5 and Section 6.3
Yeah.
just to explain what it well.
The title of Section 4 simply says civility policy. It doesn't say who it applies to.
I assume that's for everyone.
Go to paragraph 3 of the document. It tells you.
Well.
If you read it, you would say.
Basically, the key thing is when we look at these headings, titles, it should be clear from the title who applies to. Without reading paragraphs or words, someone should be able to look at the title and know who exactly it applies to.
Okay, so I can certainly add, civility policy
Dennis?
applicable to board.
How much time do we have?
And senior manager.
So real quick, so we are so close, and we're arguing over format, not substance.
Yes.
Let's try to bring it back to substance. And the fact of the matter is, I would say, Dick, if you didn't know that this applied to everyone except for this one piece, I'm not sure that you have a problem with it. Just let it run.
Well, my answer to your question, I look at this, and what does a lifeguard need to know about the board of directors' standard of conduct, restriction on board members' activities, board member civility policy? These are board issues. Now you could have this entire thing for the board, and then you could just cut off the first four items, and you've got something for the staff.
So Dick, the key thing that we need to get straight is how we're going to operate at the next meeting. So if you want to make an amendment that changes this, please prepare an amendment.
I will do that.
Is it quick, Bill?
Very quick. Just a quick
10 seconds.
heads up for everybody. If we are going to contemplate amendments to this document, and because it is closely tied to legal review by official people, those amendments better be consistent and easily reviewed. We can't have amendments that are because then we're going to have to get it re-looked at again, and it's out of our hands. It's not in this board's purview anymore.
Understood.
So if you're going to make amendments, be very careful with that wording.
So what I'd recommend is so we're going to have a motion at the next meeting there'll be a motion to approve this and repeal the three existing ethics policies, all of them except for the enforcement piece. If you want to make an amendment, please get me the text of the amendment by Monday. So I can send it to Dennis, and we can hopefully get that reviewed. And then what we'll do is we'll make the motion. We'll go through each amendment, vote on each amendment, then vote on the final policy. Jackie.
My only concern about that process is that I'm guessing there will be an amendment about the recusal regarding the Inter Arbor Trust. And that seems like something that is very significant to discuss on the evening of a vote. That is speaking to the duty of loyalty. You've got Inter Arbor Trust's own bylaws that speak to that is a conflict. And so I'm just a little bit concerned that important issue could be rushed through on the evening of the vote.
This whole document's an important issue. So yes.
It's not a consent agenda.
It's not a consent agenda. They'll be debated. It's not going to be a 10-second vote.
Well, can I respond to that or ask a question?
Quick, 10 seconds.
On that issue, it doesn't even need legal review. We've got several legal reviews of that issue, right? I think the issue for the board is whether they accept that or not.
Yeah,
and vote
and I
that
think
way.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
That's an easy one, really. You make your decision. I don't see the complication with that one.
So please, if you have amendments, please send them to me. Close of business.
I'm missing something.
5 o'clock Monday. That's the cutoff. 5 o'clock Monday. Second part, which should hopefully be faster, is the. Yes, I realize that.
I just have one question on this.
I think I can get through this in a minute. So is adjusting our current enforcement policy. So this makes a couple of changes to our current enforcement policy that basically states that the chair, if a complaint comes to the chair, it has to be looked at and voted on by the entire board. And then also changes that if there's a complaint against the chair, it goes to the vice chair with a similar process. That's the two main changes in this. And then the reporting is streamlined so that the CEO and the audit committee get all the reports. Is there any discussion on these changes? So this would be a separate motion in 2 weeks. Any comments on the?
Yeah.
Ginny?
Just so the intent here is really to make it very clear what the process should be, which is good. I don't see anything about an ethics committee in here at all, which is fine with me.
Well, this is just a adjustment of our current
I just
policy.
wanted to
There's no. It's a very
Yeah.
simple modification.
I agree. I just want to make that clear. It's simply that. Okay.
Dennis?
But won't you have to vote to overturn the prior approval of an ethics committee? Wasn't there a vote items 1, 2, and 4? And one of those was the creation of an ethics committee?
We never
prior meeting.
We voted to accept the recommendations. We did not vote to adjust policy. So we can certainly adjust the policy. Once an ethics committee is created, it's not going to happen this fiscal year, then you can adjust the policy accordingly again. But right now there is no ethics committee. So basically the idea is that we update the policy, and then when the ethics committee is actually established,
or if,
then it would make sense to update the enforcement policy as needed. But I think this is a simple change, and I think it's an important change that should just be left hanging. Bill?
Just to follow on with Dennis's comment, I believe that we voted to establish an ethics committee, and we also voted to initiate an RFP process to engage a firm to start creating that committee, and that hasn't been authorized or done yet either. So we have not been vigilant in pursuing that recommendation.
Susan?
Just an observation. It seems to me that the changes that are being proposed to this make the policy even more closed to any independent or objective view or look at these matters by removing the role of the audit committee. Is that the intent?
The intent is to basically make the policy consistent with itself. And the intent is to basically take it out of one person. So it doesn't actually move the audit committee. The audit committee still gets the reports. In fact, the audit committee currently, with the current policy, has no role besides getting the reports. The only role of the audit committee is that the complaint goes to the chair of the audit committee, but the audit committee itself has no role. The audit committee doesn't take any action based on the current policy.
The audit committee does have a role that's being changed in the proposed edits, and that is in the case of a complaint that concerns the chair of the board of the directors. So our current enforcement policy says that in that case, it would go to the chair or vice chair of the audit committee, whichever of those members is a board member. This change has it go to the vice chair of the board of directors.
Yeah, that involves a person, not a committee.
That was what I meant.
Yeah, it's going, so it just changes the person it's going to.
So it's removing the objective person and putting in another person.
It's swapping one board member for another board member.
Well,
And that's all you're doing.
it changes the spirit of that. For example, if you have an allegation about a team member, it goes to the principal ethics officer.
Yes.
If you have something at a senior level, it's handled by the president. And so similarly, if there is some allegation against the highest person on the member of the board chair, that it is carved out and goes to the audit committee, the chair or vice chair. So the idea is that the chair and the vice chair of the board work very closely together, and you would want to remove even the appearance of a conflict and not, quite frankly, put the vice chair of the board in an awkward position. So again, the ethics panel can handle all of this, and please remember that the ethics panel would handle any allegations about senior staff as well. So it's for the same reasons, to kind of take all of us out of.
I'm not disagreeing, but we don't have an ethics panel right now. Alan?
And just to further roil the waters, the chair of the board selects the board member who is on the ethics committee, board members who are on the ethics committee, so that's already a conflict.
Whereas the chair and the vice chair voted on independently.
Yeah.
So, Jenny?
Yeah, because currently, from what you're reading, although I think it should have gone to the vice chair, frankly, all along, but you're going to another board member. It's just a difference of which board member. And I think to imply that a vice chair of this board that's elected by the board, not by the chair, cannot be objective is unfair to whoever's sitting in the role of vice chair. And to assume that the other person that happens to be the chair or vice chair of the audit committee is more objective, I think that's just unfair statement.
So is the vice chair of the board more objective than the
That's not the
member
issue.
that's on the audit committee? Well, then why make the change?
Theoretically, the change.
Let me answer
Why
that.
make the change?
Let me answer that. The reason we make the change is our bylaws say that if the board chair cannot perform the board chair's duties, the vice chair performs the duties. And that's the way our bylaws are
And
set up.
council has corrected that statement in the backup materials.
There's also, I don't believe is there anything in the, in the charter of the audit committee that prevents the chair of the board from being the chair of that committee or vice chair of that committee? I mean,
Is there anything?
is there anything that precludes the chair of the board from also chairing or vice chairing the audit committee?
There is not.
So it could be, it could be the same person, and that could be a problem. Whereas the chair and the vice chair are distinctly two different people.
And I'm asking, why do we need to make the change?
Well, that's one reason.
The way that it is now?
For the reason that I just said.
The other question that I have is, there's an edit about that there would be a vote by the full board in accordance with the voting procedure as stated in the bylaws of CA. So that's another edit in there. And my concern is that you always reference or the bylaws in the spirit of that every member gets a vote in every case. So does this preclude recusal of somebody that's being accused?
It goes to the bylaws. So it basically says follow the bylaws. The bylaws are a higher document than policy.
I have to say that does not make any sense.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this, and to follow up on that, Maryland law clearly says, and I've looked this up, ultimately the board of directors is solely responsible for the ethics of an organization. Ultimately, every ethical question falls on the shoulders of the board of directors. So why wouldn't we vote on an ethics complaint?
I'm not saying you wouldn't vote on the ethics complaint. I'm saying it makes no sense for the subject of the ethics complaint to be voting on the disposition of his or proceeding.
But that's
why the vice.
And if you need to, well, I can live with that.
This is the vote. I'm not talking about who
What
gets
about
the
the-
complaint. I'm talking about who votes on the disposition.
The subject, what about the complainant?
Well, that's another story.
Anyway, for this, I'd like to take the same procedure, have a motion to update the current enforcement policy. If you want to have a amendment that changes the inclusions or strikeouts, please get that to me by Monday at 5. And then we'll debate the amendments in order. With that, seeing no further questions, I'd like to move on to 4E, the name change of the Senior Advisory Committee charter and committee name. So, Dennis, could you? Thank you. Or Jenny, do you want to introduce this?
That's the,
the Senior Advisory Committee name.
Yeah, well.
I thought, let Jenny.
Okay, Jenny.
Take turns, Dennis. Well, I think we've discussed this before, and we were asked to get a legal opinion, so we tabled our vote to accept it and also to amend the charter, and now we have a legal opinion that says everything's fine. So, and also the committee voted. That's been substantiated as well, so the committee approved it, and the changes, there were a few changes by our attorney, and the committee approved that, and your staff has in writing that, and the time that it was done, et cetera. And then we have also the legal opinion in writing from Carolyn that says everything's fine. So I don't know if you want to discuss it anymore.
Any discussion on this?
Just a question, general comment. What is the salient difference between advisory and advocacy? Why they change, and what is the impact on that? Is two different.
Apparently, you asked for a legal opinion, so I'm not going to duplicate that. They said there's no problem. that there is no significant problem.
Well, then why do it?
Because the committee feels it more represents what they are doing. And I think you had Pearl Atkinson Stewart saying that at a hearing 2 months ago. And other board members, I'm sure, have been maybe in touch with you saying how strongly they feel about it. They also don't want to be called a senior advisory committee. It's really Aging Well in Columbia Advocacy Committee, because they feel strongly they should be representing people 55 years of age and older that are also in some way have people with disabilities.
I didn't object to any of that. I was just asking about advocacy versus advisory.
Okay. Well, I think I answered that.
So it
there
sounds
was
like
no-
they're trying to update their charter based on what they're currently doing.
Right.
So that the charter and their name are consistent with what they're currently, their current mission is and what they're currently doing.
And if you read this, if the concern is they are going to go off and do something that you will be upset about, there are some safeguards here. It won't happen.
That was not my concern. I just asked what the difference was.
Okay.
Move to approve the
We can't do this.
No, this will be a, so this will be.
Could it be a consent agenda if there's no problem?
Keith?
We could, if there's no objection.
I'm doing
If there's no objection, we could put this on the consent agenda. That would, because I don't see.
May I get a second, Keith? No. Kidding.
I think that the chair can just put it on the consent agenda.
I'm teasing you.
I don't see any real concerns, so we can just put this on the
Somebody wants
consent
to take
agenda.
it off, they can.
If you want to take it off, just let me know ahead of time.
Exactly.
So that'll be on the consent agenda. Next, that brings us to questions only and the president's update. So I'll bring this to Dennis.
So it's not questions only, but I think you probably know that WSSI has been working hard on the entire Stream Reach project in Long Reach and above Lake Elkhorn, and bringing in outside experts. And I received a letter this afternoon that they are taking Reach 1 out of the project, even though it is deeply in need of work and impaired, and there's pathways. I actually drove it today. To me, clearly it needs work, but it's out of the project. I'll forward that letter to you guys tomorrow.
And I'm sorry, Reach 1 is the north
of Jackson Pond.
So north of Jackson Pond is not going to be, And there had been rumors for months they were going to take that out of the project, so that's interesting.
Now it's in writing.
Now it's, official.
Or will be.
They don't have the response to the regulatory agency yet, and it seems like some of the requirements are changing as they try to move forward, so that slowed them down. But that'll be submitted to us at the same time as they submit it to the agencies, not before. And I don't think it's I don't personally see it as a win. There's a lot of work to do. We very much support the project, but Reach 1 is not in the project.
Mm-hmm. And I assume the flow chart, whatever we want to call it, will be updated accordingly.
Right. Yes.
Bill?
Thank you for the update, Dennis. I was just wondering, I don't know how this works, but if WSSI has any data, studies, or information regarding Reach 1, would they be willing to provide that to CA staff so that we can incorporate some of their research into what? If we could ask that, I think that would be great.
Alan?
So it was alleged at Resident Speak Out that there's a bunch of questions that CA staff has not answered yet, including who would CA answer, one who's not, I guess, environment. Do you know who that was?
I don't know. I'm not familiar with that question, but I would say that the questions were directed at WSSI, and I suppose if they said they would not have a particular person that they would, when they answer the questions, I'll find out a little bit more about this, but when they answer the questions, they would answer the questions and say CA will respond. But the questions are being answered by WSSI, not by CA.
So CA has not provided WSSI any answers to those?
No.
Okay. Well, that ends that. Second question, not about this, but could you speak to the rain garden program and the funding and
So the My understanding is that the Chesapeake Bay Foundation has prioritized other areas. And so it's not a case where we haven't done a good job submitting grants. There's just simply no money. But I can get some more information on that as well.
Last thing, if you could, for 2 weeks from now, once the timeline is done.
Revised again.
I love that.
The bigger.
Sergeant, Penty, would be great if you could bring some copies. Or someone could bring some copies. My old tired eyes.
Any-
8.5 by 11.
Any other questions? Okay, that brings us to.
Oh, and then before.
Is this the old one? I got the old one.
It's the new one.
New one.
So before, so I have one other update that Jeremy has some great news to share with
Yeah.
us. And so if you have just 2 minutes.
Okay.
And I'm going to need a bigger shelf for all of the awards that Jeremy has won.
Okay.
On behalf of CA.
Oh, thank you very much. I'll be very quick. So there was a press release that went out recently regarding some recognition that CA has received associated with our work with the Department of Energy and their Better Buildings program. And so we have been very aggressive in moving towards electrification and decarbonizing our facilities to reduce our carbon footprint. So this particular award was associated with us taking some aggressive steps around heat pump deployment at the Supreme Sports Club specifically, and sharing that information with other partners basically throughout the United States, and developing a case study in partnership with the DOE about how that can be a very effective measure for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and making a facility more sustainable. So we are one of 10 organizations nationwide to be recognized for that type of work this week in Washington, D.C.
That's great. Does that also help lower utility costs?
Yes, it will, because it reduces our natural gas consumption, which has become much more expensive in recent years.
I noticed the natural gas bills seem to have gone a lot higher lately.
Yes, they have. So this, I have the was presented to us yesterday, in fact, in D.C.
Hey, Jeremy and other staff, congratulations. It was announced at the Climate Committee last
Oh, yes, yeah.
Dennis?
In closing, I'd like to say that I have heard some comments that have vilified staff about our commitment to the environment and to sustainability, and that's absolutely not the case. I mean, everything that we do, and we can disagree with people about how to get things done, but we are fully committed, and we've won more awards, and we're further ahead than anyone else in the county, certainly. So we are absolutely committed, and we'll disagree and tell you, but it's, I don't want people to think that we're not committed to helping the environment.
I think we all agree with that.
And thank you. This is definitely a testament of all the good work that we're doing here. So thank you. That brings us to proposed new topics. Andy.
Dennis, I just wanted to thank you and staff for adding additional power outlets to the board table.
It's the little stuff.
Oh. Yes. Now you tell me that I'm completely
yeah, we did. We
electronic free.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Any proposed new topics that don't rely on power?
Did anyone want to hang around for 55 minutes to listen to the alarm go off again?
That was not a new topic. That's an old topic. That's a very old topic.
Can the board take a vote on allowing Long Reach Village to keep its reserve funds this year?
Board could.
Yeah.
I know I brought this up a month ago. The issue is that we've lost a lot of tenants because of this sort of the timelines moving regarding the Stonehouse renovation. If it takes a vote of the board, then I would be very grateful for everyone's consideration. But Long Reach really does need to keep its reserve funds this year.
If we took a vote, that would have to be in either 2 weeks or the next fiscal year.
Because there's more requests, I believe.
Yeah, so
we'd have to get requests from the village manager to Dennis and Susan.
I would think they.
Well, the policy says in the year of renovations, you keep the excess cash. So I don't know.
It raises the percentage so that they'll be.
Okay, so
something in writing.
so Long Reach can keep.
Well, look at the we'll pull the policy. but-
Okay. I just want to make sure I have something to report to the village manager.
It's in the management contract.
Okay.
Yeah, there's precedent for that.
Yeah, if you could just.
Can they get something in writing? Can he get something in
I
writing?
mean, if it's in the contract, it's in the contract. I will circle back and check the contract.
Yeah, if you can just touch base with Josh and the village manager from Long Reach and just clarify what they're allowed to keep. And
Yeah, that would be good.
that'd be a good first step. Okay. Any other proposed new topics?
No.
That brings us to chair remarks. So thank you all for a good year. We've got one more board meeting where we're going to vote on some fairly important things such as the ethics policy, and look forward to seeing you all next in 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
With that, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
That second, any objections to adjourning? Seeing no objections, we adjourned.